So that's what they mean by space opera. You know, ever since Dune Part 2 came out early this year, it's been on my mind just about constantly. I close my eyes and I'm immediately flashbanged by an image of Austin Butler's bald head. It's a nightmare. And even though it's been over half a year now, I think Dune is still pretty present in all of our minds after something so grandiose as Dune Part 2. Like if I said, my name is Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, you would respond with, and say it with me now, Under the Blue Sea or something! Yeah, that's right. Rot your brain out. But while the Dune movies are pretty new to us, the story itself definitely is not. The first Dune came out in 1965, and to put that into perspective, the average home at the time cost about $20,000. So, that was a long time ago. Now, over that span of time between 1965 and 2021, Dune has had its chance to be adapted multiple times. Not a lot of times, though, because it was thought to be almost impossible to translate to film. To quote Wired, it has 4 appendices and a glossary of its own gibberish, and its action takes place on 2 planets, one of which is a desert overrun by worms the size of airport runways. Lots of important people die or try to kill each other, and they're all tethered to about 8 entangled subplots. That's a lot of words, though. If I were to put it into my own words, I would say Frank Herbert frequently got lost in his own sauce. But not everybody thought it was unfilmable. In 1974, a director, and I will probably butcher his name, Alejandro Jodorowsky, tried to pull an adaptation together. He even cast Mick Jagger, the lead singer of the Rolling Stones, as Feyd-Rautha. May thy knife chip and shadoobie shatter, I guess. Unfortunately, Alejandro Jodorowsky was French, so that's a point against him. But he also overspent his budget in pre-production alone, and his screenplay was 14 hours long, which is too long. I actually watched a documentary on this, and while he had some cool ideas, I'm actually pretty glad that he didn't get to take the first crack at Dune. You'd think with a 14-hour screenplay he was trying to be like super book accurate, but no. In fact, here's a clip of him talking about how drastically different he was going to make the movie, and it's crazy that I have to say this, but content warning for sexual assault.
No? You go with the wife. Why? The woman is wise. You take the woman. If you respect the woman, you will never have child. You need to open the costume and to rape the bride. And then you will have your picture. I was raping Frank Herbert, you know? Raping like this.
I really hope that was a language barrier issue, because if not, I think I hate him. Okay, so real quick, editing trace here. I don't think I focused enough on how much of an insane thing that was to say. Like, first off, you could have just said, need to break a few eggs to make an omelet. That's a phrase that exists, and what you said is not a metaphor that's used by normal people. The fact that that's what your mind went to, concerning. I don't know who does the investigations over in France. I'm assuming it's the FBI, the French Bureau of Investigations. Just, I don't know, look into this guy. I know he's really old already, but it's still worth a look. Also, we didn't need any of the like this action. I got the picture. You were already very vivid. Gave him way too much grace there. You don't get that from being bad at English. Eventually, his iteration of the film was moved into Ridley Scott's hands, and he, just didn't care. He just didn't want to do it. He was too busy making Blade Runner, forcing Harrison Ford to reiterate everything that happens on screen for 2 hours. So then you may be thinking, okay, then when did they make a movie about it? Silence! I'm getting to that. You see, in 1984, a feller named David Lynch was sought out to revive this project. He was really sought after at the time. He directed Elephant Man and Eraserhead, and he was even sought out to direct Return of the Jedi. So he, through much trepidation, was finally able to bring Dune to life for the very first time. So, here's my plan. The Dune we all know and love, which was directed by Denis Villeneuve. I really hope I'm saying that right. He's French, but he's French-Canadian, so it's a little better. This Dune only has 2 parts, ending with, and spoiler alert, if you haven't watched the first 2 Dune movies, probably don't. Just go watch them. They're art, please watch them, then you can watch my video, which is comparable art. The second Dune movie ends with the death of Feyd-Rautha and the taking of Princess Irulan as Paul's wife and the beginning of the Jihad. I'm guessing that that's what the majority of y'all have seen, so that's all I'm gonna watch story-wise for each of these adaptations. Which fortunately, since that's how long the first book goes anyway, they're usually sectioned off like that. So I'm going to watch these and give my vague impression of it, and then after I've watched all of them, I'll come back and compare them to the modern Dunes. So, without further ado, sorry, did I say a Dune? I meant a do. I'll kill myself later. So, without further ado, let's dive into Dune. Of course, we had to start with the beginning. I got my buddies Clayton and Avon together, and we watched Dune 1984. Alright, so we're getting ready to watch the 1984 Dune by David Lynch. Now, which of us think it's going to be better than the 2020s movies? We start out with Irulan just monologuing. I think Star Wars really changed the landscape on how acceptable it was to confront your audience with exposition as soon as the movie starts, especially in sci-fi. I know a lot of older films did it, but I think Star Wars maybe set us back a little in that regard. And not that Star Wars did it wrong. Star Wars had its own very to-the-point way of doing it just to set a scene so he didn't have to fill us in later. It's a lot easier to quickly read that text crawl, which is like filled with excitement just with the music, as opposed to Irulan just talking. I don't really care to hear Irulan talk this much. Star Wars, it almost feels like a report, and Irulan, just watch them, I guess.
The Spacing Guild and its navigators, who the spice has mutated over 4,000 years, use the orange spice gas, which gives them the ability to fold space. That is, travel to any part of the universe without moving. Oh yes, I forgot to tell you.
Why did she do that? Starting this movie out, you've already managed to utterly baffle me with your decisions here. Like, you thought you were done talking. You, a written character, thought you were done talking as the narrator. And now you're back? You weren't done? Before the opening credits, I had the chance to roll. You've confused me.
Hidden away within the rocks of these deserts are a people known as the Fremen, who have long held a prophecy that a man would come.
That a man would what? We're dropped into this meeting between the Guild and Emperor Shaddam IV. If you're not well versed in like the characters in this, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna roll with it. The Guild is very concerned about the existence of Paul Atreides. The Navigators Guild, actually wait. This is the Guild Navigator. This guy. I hate this guy. Why does he look like this? Why does he keep focusing on his mouth? He looks like if the alien from Mac and Me had syphilis. So the Guild has seen this future in which Paul Atreides has compromised spice production. If you don't remember why that's important, it's because that's how ships go to and fro in space.
Paul Atreides, we want him killed. I did not say this. I am not here.
I understand.
Didn't know you could just threaten the Emperor of the Galaxy like that, but pop off. So we get this super long exposition scene where the Emperor just lays out his plan to ruin House Atreides, which is the plot in general. It's already so grindy. Avon and Clayton and I were so mad right off the bat. You could easily make this so much more digestible with something as simple as Family Guy playing in the corner. Yeah, you go ahead and sweep up after him. Don't leave any of his syphilis shavings behind. So, Gaius Helen Mohiam, who is the Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit. The Reverend Mother overhears this whole exchange, and she decides that she needs to go pay the Atreides a visit. Now we meet Paul. He's played by Kyle MacLachlan, which I didn't realize this at first, but that is Lucy's dad in Fallout. Really like this actor. Genuinely like this actor. Hate his Paul, you'll see why. He's playing Battlefront 2 on his iPad.
I know, Thufir, I'm sitting with my back to the door. I heard you, Dr. Yui, and Gurney coming down the hall.
He weirds me out a little. I guess every Paul in every iteration weirds me out a little. He weirded me out in the book a little. That's just like what his character is. But this one's just like a different kind of weirding me out. Why is he making that face? Actually, that's fair. If a human owl walked in on me, I'd probably be making all kinds of weird faces. Maybe more concern on my face though. Like, who is that? Who? Sir Patrick Stewart plays Gurney Halleck in this version. He's played by Thanos. Why can't I think of Thanos' actor's name? I can't think of the guy's name. I'll have editing trace do it. But Sir Patrick Stewart plays Gurney Halleck, and I think it actually reads super well. Gurney wants to practice fighting with Paul, and he's just not really into it, so Gurney forces the issue and pulls a knife on him.
I'm sorry, Gurney.
Not sorry enough.
Which is also my go-to. Bro really said,
I am Steve.
we have a little action sequence here. It's basically the same thing that we see in the modern Dune, except there's other people in the room. But then we're right back into exposition. But in this one, Paul already suspects the Emperor of being out to get him.
The Harkonnens are our enemies, yes. But behind them, I suspect, is the Emperor.
I don't know how he got there. Maybe it's because like the exposition scene was so long in the beginning that just everyone wound up hearing it. Thufir is really proud of him for figuring this out though, because he beats the crap out of his shoulder. I don't know what's happening here. Even Patrick Stewart is confused. They introduce us to this thing called the weirding module. It's this thing that you can hold and yell into, and it shoots stuff. So like a gun that you have to yell at. So like a worse gun.
Precise control.
Now this is what I look like playing Blade and Sorcery. We meet Duncan Idaho and Duke Leto as they prepare to leave Caladan. Duncan looks like Lego Luke Skywalker, and Leto, I'm not a fan on it. I don't like most of the casts in this. I know a lot of it's the dialogue that kind of sours me on the actors, but I'm not a fan.
Thufir Howard has served House Atreides 3 generations. He swears you are the finest student he has ever taught. Yui, Gurney, and Duncan say the same. Makes me feel very proud.
I want you to be proud of me.
I'm proud of you, son. But I want you to be proud of me. If you didn't already know, you're gonna find out here pretty soon that it's like a staple of Paul's character in any iteration of Dune to have a lot of trippy dreams. What's not a staple of his character, though, is how much this Paul yaps during them.
Arrakis. Dune. Desert planet.
He sees Fade Rotha saying,
I will kill you.
and Chani saying,
Tell me of your homeworld, Uso.
Meanwhile, Jessica is preparing to meet with the Reverend Mother. I like this casting of Jessica. And it's probably because she just looks like if you put an 80s filter on Rebecca Ferguson from the modern Dunes. The Reverend Mother is upset with her for having a son instead of a daughter. And they argue about that for a bit before discussing the possibility of Paul being the Kwisatz Haderach.
Ready yourself, young Paul Atreides. I want to see you in your mother's chambers in 1/4 of an hour.
Yeah, well, I've already seen your mother's Oh, she's gone. Now, we cut to Leto looking forlorn as he uses his seal on some papers. There's not a lot of importance in this scene on the face. Some might argue that it's just like a transition between one scene or the other. Some might argue that it was just shown to introduce the seal, his signet. But they would be wrong, because you see that down there? The pug? Put a pin in that. It'll be useful later. I'm assuming everyone here has seen the modern Dunes, so I don't think I have to explain what's happening in the box scene. The Reverend Mother makes him put his hand in the owl box and threatens to kill him if he takes it out. Paul is shown to be imagining his hand burning away while he holds it inside. And while this is similar to the modern retelling of the story, I also think in its own way it's vastly different. I'll get more into that in the conclusion, but for now, I'll just say they completely muddled the cinematography of it by narrating every single thought possible.
You feel an itching. Now, the itching becomes burning. Heat upon heat upon heat.
It burns.
Silence! Silence! And feel flesh.
Mind killer. Crispy. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration.
Flesh. Popping off.
Anyway, I'm bored of this. How about we get a change of scenery? Remember Gadi Prime? We saw it in Dune Part 2. It was the Harkonnen home planet that had no color under the sun. We cut to there. What is that? What is that? Why? I don't know what the deal is with that thing, but let me tell you. I can't wait to see David Lynch's take on the planet. Herbert really left a lot to the imagination, so Lynch really has free reign with how cool he wants to make this planet look. It's green. Nice. Every stylistic choice in this movie so far has bothered me slightly. But the Harkonnens, they're what made me realize it. Why is this movie trying to be nasty? Weird Al mentats and Roblox knife fights, that's one thing. But David Lynch really took an entirely new planet that he could do whatever he wanted with and went, you know what theme this should have? Gross. How about disgust? And I'm not kidding when I say this scene is almost entirely useless. It introduces Feyd-Rautha and Raban, who's hitting the blue steel for some reason. The Baron is having warts drained off of his face or something, and then he kills a guy by pulling his heart valve out. They just made that up. And then he just says this line.
This is what I'll do to the Duke and his family.
You know when you were a kid and you'd be like eating with a friend of yours and they'd hold up like a grape or something and they'd go, this is you, and then they'd smush it and you'd be like, no! That's what that feels like. Except instead of a grape, he's just doing that to another guy. Hey, Todd! Yeah? This is you. Why would you do that? Do what? Say something so mean to me. So we cut to the Atreides preparing to leave Caladan. Hey, he's got a pug. Write that down. There's a reason for this, I'm positive.
Oh, this Caladan so much.
Okay, well, you haven't left yet, so there's that. Are we flashing forward to that? What's happening? Alright, now Paul has the pug. Write that down. We get this really, really gruesomely long montage of a navigator plotting its course. I hate this thing. If I saw this thing on the road, I would swerve to hit it. I hope this guy dies. This is how they arrive on Arrakis, by the way. I think I could animate this on my phone. We're finally on Dune, though, and they're narrating again.
House Atreides took control of Arrakis 63 standard days into the year 10,191.
We don't need this! We can just watch the movie! I'm making the video, I can narrate. Leto meets up with Duncan, who he sent ahead to scout out the area. Duncan suggests that they ally with the Fremen because they're stronger than he thought. Duncan looks like an accountant. That makes me mad. We see the troops settling in, and it's emphasized that they have to save water. They show that Arrakeen has been riddled with sabotage devices, and Thufir Hawat is mad about it, and he gives a mean Richard Nixon impression.
We're finding these sabotage devices too easily.
I guess that was a lot more topical at the time. They put up the shield around the perimeter. The shield looks like, I don't know what I expected. Ugly, like the rest of this movie. Leto and Paul meet Dr. Kynes. Dr. Kynes looks like this in this movie. If you haven't read the books, this is actually a more accurate version of what Dr. Kynes is, and he is the father of Chani, which they didn't worry about in the new movies, and I'll talk about that more at the end. I also like how Leto requests that Kynes messes with his still suit, and Gurney still immediately gets mad when he messes with his still suit.
Would you give us an explanation of their workings?
Basically,
Kynes notes how Paul already knew how to wear a still suit, and we know this because they voice over it.
It seemed the proper way.
that it is.
He shall know your ways as if born to them.
Of course they do. Frankly, I didn't know that I was going to be watching Thomas the Train. I also like how Leto and Gurney both act like it's some kind of revelation that Paul can dress himself properly. This kid was a biter growing up, I can tell. They climb above the ornithopter and they go fly around. I hate the ornithopter in this. Why did they build it like that? Why does it look like that? This is an ornithopter. Don't remember how to make it work though. I don't remember how to make this work. That is an ornithopter, crafted by Leonardo DiCaprio himself. That is an ornithopter from the hit game Magic the Gathering. This is a flying baseball home plate, and I resent it. They see a worm. Apparently they have lightning powers in this one. I think that was in the book. I don't remember. Y'all remember this scene where they go out and they see the harvester and the carryall gets sabotaged or it breaks, whatever the version is. I think in this one it gets sabotaged. So the Duke risks his life and sets down and they order everybody on board their ornithopter and they fly away. And his people are all impressed because he prioritized them over the spice, and the Harkonnens hadn't done that. Nice. The visuals, I will say, pretty cool for Eating the Harvester. They, especially for 1984, pretty nice. I like that. We're back at the palace. We see Dr. Yue. He's talking to Jessica about why he hates the Harkonnens, yada yada. Paul eats some spice for the first time. Meanwhile, a hunter-seeker sneaks into his room and tries to poke him. This lady walks into his room, and it tries to poke her instead, so he catches it and stabs it into a wall. She's like, "You saved my life," and frankly, I don't know how she knew what that was, but she's real grateful and decides to tip him off about traitors in his house. I guess she was just gonna let him die otherwise, but she leaves right away after without doing any, maidly duties, so it feels like that's why she was there. Anyway, the palace goes on lockdown and everyone's looking for the traitor, and at this point, to the audience, it's obvious that it's Dr. Yue. Thufir seems to think that the palace is impenetrable, though.
Our new army is still in training, but everything is shielded. And with this shielding, we are impenetrable.
So we should be safe. Uh-oh. Leto starts wandering around the palace, as you do, and he checks on Paul, who's asleep and drugged, which he says so, but not loud enough for Leto to hear.
Father, drugged.
So he wanders around a little bit more. He finds that gal who Paul saved, who is unfortunately no longer saved. She's dead. And he's all like, "What happened?" And she's like, "I'm dead. I don't answer questions." And then he's like, "Ow, I got shot by a dart." And that's all in the script. Yue comes out of the shadows and explains that he betrayed them so he could get to the Baron Harkonnen. He explains the poison tooth thing just like he did in the modern movies, and then he just reaches in and takes it. He just takes his tooth out. That was way too easy. What is he, a radium girl? And then he just sticks the new one in. Is he made of Legos? The shields get sabotaged and then the Harkonnens start bombing them. And there's a pug running through the halls. Write that down. This is important. Thufir finds that all the weirding modules have been destroyed. Oh no. I never got to learn why those were important. The Baron captures Jessica. And then he spits on her. Gross, man.
I thought of many pleasures with you. It is perhaps better that you die in the innards of a worm.
I just hate watching this. I don't like it. Maybe that's an example of good directing because I'm uncomfortable, but it's still it's a weird choice. This Baron would never spit on this Jessica. It just wouldn't happen. Am I just bringing out my Legos because I really like this set and I think it looks cool? No. The fight scenes between the Atreides men and the Harkonnens are really funny to me because they're mainly just the Atreides men grab the Harkonnens and the Harkonnens push them away. And that's it. They do have some guns, and sometimes they forget to put in the shooting animations. Also, Duncan gets shot in the head through his shield. I don't know how they did that. I don't know. Is that in the book? Slow bullets? It's been less than a year. I think I'd remember slow bullets. Yue gets his confrontation with the Baron, who apparently said that he'd reunite him with his wife if he delivered Leto to him. Most obvious trap ever. I always thought, in every version of Dune, that's a goofy plot point. But Fenring stabs him in the shoulder blade, and that really does him in really quick. Paul and Jessica are put into the not ornithopter, and Jessica realizes that Yue left them still suits. She's gagged, though, and she can't use the voice. But a guard says something a little harassment-y to Jessica, and Paul tries to use the voice on him instead. I was really distracted by their faux hawks in this scene, but I did notice that at one point they really poorly ADR'd one of the guards.
Did you hear a noise from the little one?
Huh? I didn't hear anything.
Usually I wouldn't nitpick something like that, but I think this movie has already used its fair share of voiceover. Paul uses the voice on the guards to remove Jessica's gag, and then Jessica uses the voice on them. Paul takes control of the ornithopter and immediately breaks a wing off of it. Shoot, I guess he's gonna lose control of it now.
It's under control.
Oh. Leto is brought to the Baron to be gloated over, and he does the tooth thing, but he accidentally does it to his mentat instead. Jessica senses his death Princess Leia style, and has this reaction.
Leto, he's dead! No, he's dead!
Meanwhile, the Baron has this reaction.
I'm alive, huh?
He's really happy to be alive. They crash land in the southern regions of Arrakis. Paul worries that he feels nothing after the death of his father, and then we get this scene.
Where are my feelings? I feel for no one. The second moon.
Sick transition, dude. Paul has a vision of the conversation between the guild navigator and the emperor, and then he sees they want to kill him over the spice. And then he also learns that his mom is pregnant. Gross way to show that. And then he learns that he'll be called Muad'Dib.
They will call me Muad'Dib.
And then he vows to destroy the emperor and the baron. There's just... I hate to do like one after the other, but there's not that much substance to fill in. They decide they need to cross the desert to reach this rock mountain, and they set a thumper and then walk without rhythm.
Remember, walk without rhythm, and we won't attract the worm.
Yep, that's without rhythm, all right. I guess they didn't do it well enough, though, because the worm does sense them, and they have to run as fast as they can up a mountain and hide inside of it while the worm beats on it with its face. They find themselves inside this tunnel with man-made steps, and they follow it to find the Fremen.
I will take the boy man. He shall have sanctuary in my tribe.
You could just say boy. That's actually what that means. I think it's really funny to hear "I will protect your son" and immediately put the guy who said it in a chokehold. Then again, he does look like J.D. Vance, so I'd probably do the same thing. Paul scampers off like a little freak, and he meets Chani. Now, I'm trying to remember why she was important.
I am Chani, daughter of Liet.
From my dreams. So beautiful.
Right.
Come with me, I'll show you an easier way down.
You have strength. You shall be known as Usul, which is the strength of the base of the pillar. This is your secret name in our troop, but you must choose the name of manhood, which we will call you openly.
What do you call the mouse shadow in the second moon?
We call that one Muad'Dib.
Could I be known as Paul Muad'Dib?
You are Paul Muad'Dib.
How did we get here? Why did he pick those names? And then Stilgar decides immediately to show them their secret stash of water, and Chani is immediately like, "Tell me of your homeworld, Usul." How did we get here? What? I feel like we missed like 2 hours of development. Also, he has a really funny reaction. Hey, tell me of your homeworld a little bit. I hear you get a lot of rain there. Handshake? I mean, we already met like 10 minutes ago, but I feel like this movie was dragging so slowly, and then we skipped like 6 hours of content without a trace. Now I gotta fill in. We cut back to the Harkonnen planet for a bit. This almost isn't even necessary to include, but I just wanted to show this. Why is he doing that? I don't know. He also says this.
I place you in charge of Arrakis. It's yours to squeeze, as I promised. I want you to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. Then
we see Fade Rotha walk out of the steam room wearing a Batarang Speedo. Things are just happening at this point. I'm exhausted. I hope Sting was having fun at least. He looked like he was having fun. They go ahead and skip forward to the scene where they make Jessica drink the worm juice. And they were so unprepared for this scene that they had to have the entire thing voiced over by Irulan.
Following the Bene Gesserit tradition, the old Reverend Mother surrendered her life as she surrendered her knowledge. Jessica had successfully transmuted the poisonous water of life.
Which hasn't been done since the beginning of the movie. That's like putting the opening text crawl in the middle of The Last Jedi.
I wish I could put my fist through this whole lousy, beautiful town.
Thufir gets captured by the Harkonnens, and just like in the book, they have him poisoned, and he has to continue in their service to get the antidote regularly. Except in this, they make him milk a cat for it.
We brought you a little cat, Thufir. You must care for it if you wish to live. A poison has been introduced into your body. By milking this this smooth little cat's body, you receive your antidote.
I don't get it. Where are you getting these ideas? David Lynch was high. He had to have been. I mean, don't get me wrong. So was Frank Herbert. From what I read, Frank Herbert was a big fan of psilocybin. This guy was on shrooms squared. Because what is this? Milk a cat? We see Paul and Chaney run off together, and then they kiss underwater and have naked. Immediately after, Paul addresses the Fremen fighters and tells them that he will teach them the weirding way of fighting, which consists of him telling this guy to punch a rock.
Hit it.
And then yell at a rock.
Yell at it.
And then he uses this weirding module that he built to yell at it, and it explodes. So that's the weirding way he was going to teach them. Not really a way, more of a gun. Imagine you're talking to a guy who went to like the police academy and you ask him what they teach you there, and he's like, oh, the Glock way. And when you're like, what's the Glock way? He just takes out his gun and shoots a dog. It's such a weird take on the voice, and I don't really get what it adds to the story. I get that it's like a MacGuffin and it's something tangible, but I feel like the voice is not that much different from the Force, which was seen in Star Wars and is kind of what I think this Dune came from. Maybe that's why. Maybe they didn't want something that was super close to the Force, so instead they give them Skyrim shouts to Fusro Da Harkonnens off of ledges. But I think giving the Fremen like an edge over the Harkonnens with this cool new tool kind of undercuts the like idea of the Fremen. They're supposed to be good fighters in their own right because they've harnessed desert power, because they basically are the desert. That's why Paul is able to lead them into victory the way that he is. But in this, it really just seems like they're this lobotomized, ready-made army for Paul to take command of almost as soon as he's in exile with little to no training, just like a montage. Paul has no character development in this. He's the same guy that he was in the beginning of the movie, except that he talks more stern. And to support what I'm saying even more, Paul decides in the same thought that it's time for him to ride the worm. Not because the Fremen haven't accepted him yet, because they have. Not because he wants to show solidarity with the Fremen, because that's not a plot point in this movie. Just cuz. I mean, would I want to learn to ride a sandworm just cuz? No, I'm scared of big things that move. Shai Hulud. Yeah. The sequence of riding the worm is alright though. I mean, it's not as good as it was in Villeneuve's movies, but it's also 1984, so. We see the Fremen begin to ravage the Harkonnen spice harvesters, and one of the Harkonnens runs back, and he's like, Muad'Dib, Muad'Dib! And Rabban is like, I'm poking your eyes out, rah! I don't know why he did that. Stuff just happens. I'm just living. I don't want to watch this movie anymore. Irulan narrates the following time skip.
In the 2 standard years that followed, Muad'Dib and the Fremen brought spice production to a standstill.
Including Aliyah arriving on the scene and how she's all like weird and adulty now. Then Paul finds Gurney in one of their raids.
They said you were dead! They said...
I actually think that his "you young pup" scene was very natural feeling, a lot more than... I still can't remember his name. Hey, Josh Brolin! A lot more than Josh Brolin's scene, even.
You young pup. You young pup.
Don't get me wrong, I love Josh Brolin's Gurney. I think he's the definitive Gurney. But something so clunky as "you young pup" sounds much more natural out of Patrick Stewart's mouth. If you put "sir" at the beginning of your name, you can pull off a lot more Shakespearean lines. The Navigators, who are nasty by the way, and I wish nothing but death upon them, are not happy about the loss of their spice supply. So they complain to the Emperor, and he says to go ahead and genocide him.
I want 50 legion of Sardaukar on Arrakis at once.
50 legions? That's our entire reserves as well.
This is genocide. The deliberate and systematic destruction of all life on Arrakis.
So because of the times, this scene might go over some of like the more modern audience's heads. This scene is showing that Emperor Shaddam IV is evil because genocide is bad. Controversial as of late, but in 1984, it was a little more of a commonly held belief. Paul sees all this in a vision, as well as seeing that they're afraid that he's going to take the water of life.
The Emperor will stop him. He won't take the water of life.
That's why they want me killed. They're afraid I'll take the water of life.
So naturally, he has to take the water of life. So they run, or rather they frolic into the desert. And then Chani gives him the water. Somehow it becomes night and a bunch of worms show up to watch, and then he starts bleeding from his nose, and then Jessica... Whoa, sorry, you changed your hairstyle. She's bleeding from her nose, as well as Aaliyah and the Reverend Mother, and just, there's a lot of nose bleeding going on. And then it's day again, so I guess the nighttime was symbolic, or maybe it wasn't symbolic because the worms are still there. Maybe just a ton of time passed. Maybe I'm just confused. Maybe I don't like this movie very much. And now it's time to address the fighters.
Your time has come.
Their time has what?
A storm is coming.
The storm is what?
Our storm. And when it arrives...
When it what?
It will shake the universe. Emperor! We come for you!
Emperor what? Okay, I'm sorry, there were just too many opportunities. I felt like I had to. The Emperor shows up. It's time to do their thing.
Bring in that floating fat man, the Baron.
Me when I smell pie. Yeah, and they cut off Raban's head. There it is. Aaliyah shows up with a message for the Emperor, and the Reverend Mother is immediately like, kill her!
Kill this child, she's an abomination.
Which I'm assuming she can tell, like, what she is and who she is, but frankly, that's a fair reaction even if she couldn't. She's terrifying.
Get out of my mind!
Not until you tell them both who I really am.
But Aaliyah makes her say her name Walter White style.
Daughter of Duke Leto the Just and the Royal Lady Jessica. Sister of Paul Muad'Dib.
Paul's sister. Paul is Muad'Dib.
And then the Baron turns into Tom from Tom and Jerry. The Fremen ride in on worms and they start shooting everybody with the weirding modules. It's kind of a long sequence. Meanwhile, the Baron tries to kill Aaliyah, so Aaliyah poisons him with the Gom Jabbar and then pulls out his suspensor plugs. And then, actually, I have to let you watch this. This is what it looks like when you beat Bowser in Super Mario Galaxy, but somehow more cartoonish. But okay, the Baron's dead, home stretch. No, wait, actually first, Aaliyah does this. I'm so scared of her. I'm so scared of her. Paul enters the Emperor's ship with his entourage. Also, Pug is back, take note, and the child holding it is holding the pug wrong. That's not how you hold a dog, and the dog knows it. He clearly wants down. Not to question the appearance of the sacred pug, how did it get there? You know? See, you don't like being held like this, do you? What are you really worried about? I can let you go. I can let you go. I do really want to know, though, how did it get there? Did they keep that pug alive in Erikine? The Harkonnens? Kept a dog alive? Really? And then when did they bring him into the throne room, and why? But now it's time to confront the Emperor.
You mustn't speak!
I remember your Gom Jabbar. Now you'll remember mine. I can kill with a word.
And his word shall carry death eternal to those who stand against the righteous.
What's really funny to me about this scene is they never tell you that what they're reciting are prophecies. There's no setup for this, they're just saying it. In most movies, that would be fine. It's okay to leave a little bit of ambiguity. But in this movie, where they already use so much exposition to explain small things, I feel like something as big as this needs to not be ambiguous. So it really just sounds like every time Paul does something, the Fremen are just kind of hyping him up with a little addendum. And you can have hype men while still showing that it's a prophecy. For instance, Stilgar. He says as written so many times, and I eat it up. And I love that. So this time, Paul challenges Feyd to the fight.
There is a Harkonnen among you. Give the Harkonnen a blade, and let him stand forth.
It's a lot slower paced, but I do feel like the slow pace of this kind of helps build up the tenseness of it. Well, mostly. Feyd has this little stinger knife with poison on it, and it's implied that Paul stabs himself on the knife to kill Feyd because Paul can change poisons now. He could in the book because of the water of life, he can transmute the poison. But it doesn't really say, and it doesn't really show him get stabbed on it. It just introduces that there's a poison knife, and he's like, well, I got you anyway, and kills him. But then he Skyrim shouts Feyd into the ground for good measure, I guess. But then everyone's like, whoa, you don't need the weirding module to Skyrim shout anymore. That really would have been useful while you were fighting him, huh? Doesn't do that much now that he's a corpse smashed into pavement. We get a final message from Irulan, which I will not read, but instead play.
Muad'Dib had become the hand of God, fulfilling the Fremen prophecy. Where there was war, Muad'Dib would now bring peace. Where there was hatred, Muad'Dib would bring love. To lead the people to true freedom, and to change the face of Arrakis.
All of that's wrong, by the way. I'm about to spoil something that happens after Dune Part 2, but in case you can't pause it, don't scramble for your phone. I'm not going to say it out loud. I'm just going to put it in subtitles and you can read it. So don't look until you hear me speak again. And then it starts raining. Also not a thing that happens, but I guess they had to tie it up nicely because they knew they were never going to make another one of these. So what did I think? Well, I don't want to go too far into depth about what I think of it because I'm saving that for the conclusion. I will say, though, that we all gave it 2 stars on Letterboxd. Avin's review was source material, who needs it, and Clayton's review was what was up with all the pugs. That's a good question, because as far as I could tell, there was no reason to have these pugs involved. I was expecting a big reveal at the end where, like, the pugs were the real Atreides all along. The pugs were tied in with the Guild Navigators. Nothing like that. I thought maybe it was like a Lucas-esque ploy to sell toys, but when I looked it up, there were no Dune pug toys anywhere to be found. So maybe they weren't a plug for pug toys. Pug plug. Shameless pug. But that doesn't mean they weren't a plug for something else. You see, I thought maybe I was missing the bigger picture, or maybe I was missing the picture altogether. These pugs showed up in the most random places possible, and sometimes they were like showing up just barely in frame in situations they shouldn't have been in the first place. And it set me to wonder, were they in those particular places for a reason? Maybe David Lynch was trying to paint a picture with where the pugs were on the screen. Paint an actual literal picture with their positions on the screen. I charted everywhere the pugs were on screen. Playing this 2-hour game of connect the dots. I measured, I graphed, and I finally came up with this. It's all meaningless. I have no idea what this could be. Man, that's hours of work just down the drain. Wait a minute. If I turn it, it looks exactly like the poster for the 2000 miniseries Frank Herbert's Dune! Well, since we're on the subject, the year is 1999, and that means we've had a good 15 years to really stew on why David Lynch's Dune sucked so bad. I think one big flaw that was pretty much universally agreed on is that the original Dune was supposed to last a good 3 hours, so an hour of it got cut. That's like 33% of its time. Made it very, very rushed. Now, Richard P. Rubinstein, who would become the executive producer for the miniseries that's to come here that I'm about to talk about. Hey, so real quick sidebar, this is an actual genuine picture that comes up when you Google him. It's on his IMDb page. I guess he looks like that sometimes, because it's not all of his pictures. Said, hey, instead of a movie, why don't we make this a miniseries so it can be more drawn out and therefore fleshed out, and therefore less stinky and dumb and gross? And I'll go on record saying that verbatim. His words, not mine. He said, I have found there's a wonderful marriage to be had between long, complicated books and a television miniseries. There are some books that just can't be squeezed into a 2-hour movie. And you know what? Yeah. Obviously. Lots of people agreed with that, and it was approved for production in November. But without further ado, a Dune if you will, I present to you Frank Herbert's Dune, Episode 1. It starts out, honestly, pretty similar to the last one. There's a woman narrating, and I can only assume it's Irulan.
Arrakis. Dune. Wasteland of the Empire. And the most valuable planet in the universe.
She explains spice and all that jazz. This time though, she isn't a head floating in space. And she doesn't hit us with any of that, oh, and I forgot to mention fake out. We're just simple exposition. She's just talking over this rendering of Arrakis, which Avon pointed out to me looked exactly like Knights of the Old Republic. This is Yavin 4, that's Arrakis. It's pretty close. The opening sequence is like a fever dream. I think that they forgot that epilepsy was a thing whatsoever when they made this. It turns out that it's a dream, Paul's dream specifically, and he wakes up abruptly.
This move to Arrakis comes at a delicate moment for House Atreides, a test of your father's loyalty to the Emperor.
You must remember, Paul, our society is a tangled web of competing forces.
This scene right here had us very confused on how this miniseries was going to look, but turns out we're just stupid. It was a hologram.
Tended.
Dr. Yui would be disappointed.
Then he'd know how I feel.
Attention. Departure from Caladan airspace 01000. It's never easy, leaving one's home, Paul. Think of this as a new adventure. The adventure of a lifetime.
You call this an adventure?
I already hate this Paul. First thing that we see of him, he's whining.
Come here, boy. Let me have a better look at you.
His first action is to pout, and his first line is to whine. Maybe that's realistic for a Duke's son, but it's made worse by the fact that this guy looks like he's 25. You are too old to act like this. Don't get me wrong, it might be more realistic, in fact I'm sure it is. I'm also mad and don't like to see when rich kids in real life do this, so. But you know what happens already in this scene. Paul is visited by Gais Helen Mohayim, who wants him to put his hand in the ouchie box. Because this is our first introduction to pretty much all the characters here, it retains some of the mystery that it had in the book. Questions like, why is she here? What does she want with Paul? What's her connection with Paul? Why is she dressed like that? What's with that hat? Who did Paul's hair like that? Aren't they rich? Why does he look homeschooled? Why does Paul look like the most homeschooled person I've ever seen in my life? They don't really explain the voice in this.
I would like to hear about your dreams.
They're just dreams.
About what? Why don't you tell me?
It really just sounds like they're trying to mog each other with their best gravelly voices, which actually when I watched Dune Part 2 the first time, it took me a bit to realize that the voice had power because it had been a while since I'd seen the previous one. I kind of thought that they were just like talking really mean to each other. And it's like that with them, except it sounds less magical. So it's kind of given like, I'm not worried about it.
I'm not worried about any of this.
They do the same bit where you can see he's like imagining his hand burning up, except from the perspective that we see it, like we can mostly see his hand still. So it's really funny to show him imagining it when he could just be like, just kind of look down at it. He's a lot more stoic in this version though, I will say. He's not drooling all over the box.
You're a gifted boy, young Atreides. But you have much to learn.
He survived.
You should have warned me.
She was forbidden.
I'm sorry, Paul.
Okay, so your next line is also whiny. Nice.
Good thing you don't play your balisette as badly as you fight, Gertie. It's too bad Duncan isn't here. Then I could get a real workout. Now you done it.
That's not how I imagine Gurney ever, actually. Just like an old, Scotsman. I guess that's fine. I don't know. At least their shields aren't blocky. Paul sucks though. Look how mad he's getting at Gertie for winning their sparring match. This Paul always storms off. I don't get it. I do think that this pulls a lot of inspiration from Star Wars. Specifically, I think a lot of the choices made here were heavily influenced by The Phantom Menace. The colors are all on the same palette, the dialogue is a lot more Lucas-esque.
They used to be human, didn't they? Until the spice changed them.
I don't think anyone knows for sure.
I've never seen one.
No one has.
The ship designs just scream Star Wars. And Luke wasn't in The Phantom Menace, but Paul is clearly taking a lot of notes from his character. I'd go so far to say that this Paul is absolutely derived from Luke. It's only 10 minutes in and Avin and I are already discussing how he's absolutely about to go through his whiny to stoic arc. And it makes sense. The Phantom Menace came out like a year before filming started for this. So that in and of itself, I'm not knocking it. It's just obvious. We get pretty much the same exposition scenes that we got in David Lynch's version, except this time Thufir Hawat doesn't look like an owl. He looks like the Joker. We get to see the Guild Navigator again. Now, little factoid about the making of this video. Avin and I actually watched this before we watched David Lynch's Dune, because we were saving that one for Clayton. And while watching this, I thought, man, that thing is ugly, and I wish we didn't have to look at it. But then we watched David Lynch's version, and it's not that bad. This thing is beautiful. I love this guy. I love this thing. I would give this guy a kiss on his big ol' ballsack head. Why did they do that? Is there like a place in the book, maybe like in Dune Chapter House, I haven't read Chapter House yet, where like guild navigators are being described as being akin to testicles? Like, are they a rare mutation of testicular cancer? I didn't get that far.
And so it begins. The trap is set. The prey approaches. A glorious winter is about to descend on House Atreides and all its heirs. The centuries of humiliation visited upon my family will finally be avenged.
Is that the president from Smiling Friends? This is the Baron, obviously. It's funny they decided to double down on the red hair thing. He went from being ginger to being actually Elmo. In fact, they turned his whole planet red. But I'm not complaining. That's fine. The Baron is a lot more regal in this, I will say. He's definitely, like, ridiculous, but he's not so spastic. And he's not disgusting. Sorry. He's not disgusting. I have to let him go. I have to let the old Baron go. Okay, much better. We see Feyd-Rautha. He's a lot more book accurate in this version. You can already tell he isn't as much of a little freak. Both other movies made him a little freak, even the modern one. I like Austin Butler's freak, but he wasn't so freaky in the books. The directors were like, what if we named Feyd-Rautha Freak-Rautha instead? And instead of having normal hair, we didn't do that. And then we have Raban, who just has red painted onto his scalp. I described the dialogue before as being Lucas-esque, but it's especially so with the Harkonnens. Even more so, it's almost like Shakespearean. And I get that that's against the idea of show, don't tell, but it's so ridiculous with the Harkonnens that I think it kind of works in this version. I'll play a clip for you, you'll see what I mean.
Duke Leto is a very popular man. The other great houses will be glad to get rid of him, even though they would never admit it. The spice will flow. By the time the traitor is fully revealed, the fate of Atreides will already be sealed.
Is he Arrakis? He just turned into that planet. I'm confused. We meet Duncan and Leto now. I really like Leto's casting in this. He seems militaristic and collected while still maintaining like a caring demeanor. I think William Hurt was a great cast. Duncan, on the other hand, was a bad cast.
Latest immigration reports.
They fear our regime will be as bad as the Harkonnens.
Don't like him. Doesn't seem like a universe-class fighter. He kind of looks like he's an accountant named Terry. Why are we casting Duncan as an accountant? Both of them so far look like they could have been in Office Space. Same gig though. Leto sends Duncan to the Fremen. You know the drill. Paul and Jessica arrive at Arrakeen, and they get their first look at the Fremen. Their eyes glow. I don't think I like that. I think it just makes sense that they're blue. Also, the eye rotoscoping sucks. Like sometimes if they turn too far, just like one eye will no longer be blue. but you can still see it, so it should be blue. They go out of their way to show that the Atreides want to be good people, though. Jessica makes sure to stop charging people for water outside the palace. I thought it was cool that they included that to, get rid of the, what are they, the water sellers, water salesmen, I don't know, water vendors. Meanwhile, Paul oogles a Fremen girl.
Come, Paul. The men are waiting.
I'm sorry, it's so out of character for him. I get what they're doing, I get the arc that they're trying to set up for him. But Paul's character has already been written by Frank Herbert. And this is Frank Herbert's Dune, so I feel like he doesn't need help. Like, watch him at this meeting. He's acting unengaged, and then he's acting condescending.
It's quite another to pocket some of their earnings.
Well, then just tell them what we're doing. Bank the entire amount to his name, Shaddam IV, but then deduct it from our taxes as a legitimate expense. In other words, cost of doing business.
He's Rizless.
Well done, lad. Well done.
No, not well done. I hate this gurney. I hope this gurney dies. We cut to the Emperor's planet, which looks like an animation out of VeggieTales. And we see Princess Irulan and the Emperor. I'm sorry, did I say Emperor? I meant Pimperer. Look at this guy. He looks like Jeff Goldblum threw up on him. And his Mentat took all the chin known to mankind. Where'd he get all of that? He and his Mentat discuss marrying Irulan off.
You must marry her well. Someone with a suitably pliable personality.
Too bad it won't be that young Atreides. The most admirable lad, I'm told. Good union of breeding and training.
Which seems to be a theme in this miniseries. We focus a lot more on Irulan. She's young, and while she's clever, she's not entirely competent. You can see the Reverend Mother getting frustrated with her while she's giving her personal lessons.
Why did we come here, Father? And don't just tell me it's a matter of honor or duty.
Of course, we start the next scene with more whining, right? Father, why did we come here? Father, when can I leave to be on my own? I've got the whole world to see.
We've been entrusted with the most profitable commodity in the universe. That alone makes us many enemies.
Then why don't we call them out? Expose them. In front of the Emperor.
What if he's one of them? The Emperor needs us. For the moment. But he fears us, Paul.
Well, then, if you're right, this place is a trap.
Perhaps. But knowing there's a trap is the first step in evading it.
I don't think he's gonna evade it. I've seen a lot of iterations of this story, and none of them does he evade it. I don't think he's very good at evading it. I don't think he can evade traps very well. They do try and present Leto as more of a personable character, and I think they do a good enough job that you feel more attached to him than you did before. There are times when he feels more like a main character in this first episode than Paul ever did. Green? Why are we doing green again? It hurts my eyes. I thought we were done with green. I thought that we learned our lesson.
One of yours, Turok.
Harkonnen mercenaries.
Duncan looks like that one TikToker who goes, "You are mentally ill."
Shout out to you. You're all mentally ill, but you also know how to throw that batty back.
I didn't mean to intrude.
You didn't intrude, you were just walking by. They show Dr. Yue and Jessica's dynamic a little more. Same thing as before, where they kind of set up the conflict with his wife and how he was inevitably going to betray the Atreides family. The sexual tension is a little odd. I don't like how handsy he is. We get this scene with Dr. Kynes where Paul already knows how to put on his still suit, but the still suits suck in this. They're green camo for no reason. Where are you blending in? It's a desert. You only have tan. And on top of that, it doesn't look like it's made to collect moisture. I actually liked Lynch's still suits a lot better. How hard is this? Ornithopter. 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 That's not an ornithopter. It's not even close.
And those are the scouts?
Yes. Watching for worm sign.
Worm sign?
Wherever there is spice, there are worms.
Always?
Kynes is real for that. I would also ignore Paul if he asked me a question. Shut up. homeschooled Kurt Cobain. This is the scene where the carryall has been sabotaged. By the way, the PS2 called and asked for its beta test animations back. But yeah, they gotta evacuate the rig.
Over here! Over here! Over you! Over here!
Over here! What's the moral of the story here? Say it with me. Don't cast British people. It's embarrassing. For as bad as the animation is, though, the worm is actually kind of sick. I think this does a better job of showing that Leto does actually care about people.
This is a different kind of man. He risked his life and that of his son to save the men instead of the spies.
Back on the Harkonnen planet, everything looks so much better, and that's not a high bar. It does look all over the place. It's not great. In fact, why does any of this look like that? What is going on here? If I saw this now, I would say it's AI generated. I'm gonna assume it wasn't because this was made almost 25 years ago. Doesn't matter though, because it's already 10 times better than what we had. What are they training for exactly? Combative jump roping? In this scene, they're discussing the need to take Arakeen here, but I'm actually more interested in the dynamics, or I guess the trinamics, between the Baron, Raban, and Feyd-Rautha.
For your approval, Uncle. The slave is quite a specimen this time, don't you think, Raban? Perhaps Feyd shouldn't be quite so casual today.
Yes. Perhaps my dear brother might even break a sweat today.
What you fail to understand is that I want Leto to become popular. I want him to feel secure. Confidence breeds distraction. And that is when one is most vulnerable.
They didn't really showcase the favoritism in the 1984 version. They didn't really show how Raban was more of a pawn for the Baron than anything, as opposed to Feyd, who the Baron had his sights set on in every way, including the Arkansas way. They managed to show the Baron's lust for Feyd, you know, the gross incest part. Also, he has this cool metal fan. Paul visits the Arakeen Gardens, and he meets Kynes there, who proudly describes how moisture collectors work.
Needs a new dew collector. Dew collector? Chromoplastic. At night it cools very fast. In the morning daylight heats it. The surface condenses moisture out of the air. And it trickles down to keep the plants alive. A simple beauty. A meaningless beauty.
Jackass. He was so happy about his little moisture collectors, and you're over here sandstorming on his parade. I hate this Paul. I hope this Paul dies! Kynes explains that someday he hopes to change the ecology of the entire planet. And Paul's like, how? And Kynes is like,
perhaps one day the person will come who will understand, who will see the future and know what can be. The one who will change Arrakis. The Mahdi.
And then he scurries off like a little freak. And I think that's a Batman reference because he's dressed like the Joker. Paul has another vision where he hears Chani asking him to tell her of the waters of his homeland.
Tell me about the waters of your homeland, Mahdi.
Before he's startled awake.
I'm sorry, my lord. Mavis didn't tell me you were in here.
Why were you just standing there watching him? I don't care if you didn't know he was in here. I feel like you know by the time you're standing over him like this. Also, why are you dressed like a dog?
I was tired. Fell asleep.
Yeah, that tends to happen. This is the scene where the Hunter-Seeker happens, except this time, it's a sperm for some reason.
Don't move. Just do exactly as I say. It's a Hunter-Seeker. It will kill you. Instantly, if you move. Listen to me. The operator, wherever he is, can only target movement. Stay perfectly still. Don't give in. Fear is the mind killer.
You don't have to talk this much. You are moving your mouth. Just tell her not to move. I don't think it's that hard. In fact, this version of Paul already knows how to use the voice, so just use the voice on her, tell her to stay still. No need to explain anything.
You're lucky to be alive.
Jerk, how is she supposed to know? Why are you being mean to her?
There is a traitor among you. Someone close. Someone very close.
What is it with these Fremen saying some odd BS and then scampering off like a little freak? Gurney finds and kills the spy. I kind of like that better than like finding the corpse of a spy. It makes Gurney seem a little more competent.
Burn him. Everything except the hands. Put some spice in each one and send them to the Baron on Gedi Prime.
You know what? That's so imaginative, man. Creative, even. Good for you, man. I'm proud of you. I'm being nice to him because he doesn't have a lot of time left. Paul discusses who the traitor could be with his father.
Never let sentiment cloud your judgment, son. There is someone.
So this is how it works. They sow the seeds of distrust. And get us to fear each other.
Learn this lesson well, son. If you want to hold Arrakis, you must be prepared to fight fear with fear. Fear and power.
I don't really like how the Leto-Paul relationship is seen here. In the book and in the modern movies, like, yeah, maybe Paul doesn't know if he wants to be the Duke immediately. At least he doesn't know what he wants as the Duke's son. But he also doesn't have to be lectured by Leto. He's been trained well and he was raised by a Bene Gesserit, like he's smart. So it turns out that they were waiting for a party to start in their palace, like 10 feet away, and everyone was just there the whole time, being really quiet. It's kind of funny to imagine just like, hey, it's really great to see you again, by the way. Yeah, you too. Yeah, how's Arrakis treating you, by the way? You know, it's all right. Hot. Yeah, I can tell that much. Why are we supposed to be whispering again? Oh, it's so everyone can hear how deep and introspective the Duke and his son sound.
Hold Arrakis, you must be prepared to fight fear with fear.
That honestly isn't something I would say if I knew everyone could hear me. Yeah, no, I don't know. Like that's cause for concern, especially like hearing that as a lesson to his son, who's like gonna take the throne. I've never heard him say anything like that before. You've never heard him say anything like that before. I'm clapping because I'm scared. Irulan shows up too. Like I said, Irulan is way more important in this than she is in the original. Like, she never even set foot on Arrakis in the book until the very end. That's actually the first time that any of the main characters even see her. That's okay though, because she's a butterfly with many other butterflies upon her. Those all have to be endangered by now. I hate their hats. Everyone looks like a giant squid. Paul, of course, gets mad about something and storms away. Actually fair this time. Their hats are making me mad too. Also, Kynes keeps looking in the camera when he speaks. Paul is just so up in arms all of a sudden, though. Like, he even accuses Gurney of being the traitor.
Your father rescued me from an Arkan slave pit, boy. Took me into his household. Grew me.
Crazy.
As his war master.
Sorry, I think I expect people named Leto to be perverts at this point. Paul does this weird little stand-up bit.
Gentlemen and ladies. I use the terms loosely, of course. I, the Baron Harkonnen,
Gurney's very real in this, by the way.
have decided that...
Yeah. Apparently the fat jokes really land, though.
Therefore, and henceforth, in conclusion and forevermore, ergo, and etc., our ample and royal self, we shall no longer be known as House Harkonnen. We shall be... House Hog.
Now I know why they say your skill with a knife is exceeded only by your mastery of the Baliset.
Careful. Spice beer can go to your head before you know it.
So I've noticed. You were expecting someone more delicate. There's an ancient saying I've learned to trust. Never judge a book by its cover.
Do not judge me by just my butterflies. I am more than just butterflies. You probably think I'm an amorphous cloud of butterflies. I'm not. I'm a princess. These characters suck. They argue about how annoying it is to be rich.
Poor boy. One day he will inherit responsibility for the greatest treasure in the universe.
And a never-ending struggle to defend it.
And then apparently that's flirting? Is this Riz? Now they're dancing. What's happening? What happened with these characters? And then the Sardaukar come and take her away. None of this was in the book. I'm confused. I don't know what's happening. I've been skipping over these, but Paul all along has been having these visions of his dad's face covered in blood, like he's rising out of a blood pool. Only this time, directly after, he shows up in his room and glows. And then Paul just starts tweaking out after that, which is fair.
Duncan? Forgive the abrupt arrival, my lord. But we've taken a force of Harkonnen infiltrators. The Fremen found them in the cave of the Shield Mountains. One of the Fremen, Turok, was badly wounded. I rushed him here for treatment.
Paul sees Duncan and runs up to him while his father is in the meeting with the leader of the Fremen. He sucks. This is also how I greet my dog when I get home. Stilgar does the spitting on the ground thing that we see in the movies. And this time it's actually Paul who intervenes and explains the tradition of spitting on the ground for the gift of your body's moisture.
Thank you for the gift of your body's water, Stilgar. And accept it in the spirit with which it was given.
I think that actually makes a little more sense when you think about it, because Paul is supposed to almost intuitively know the ways of the Fremen. That said, it doesn't make sense for Duncan to seem surprised because he literally lived with them for months. Anyway, they basically wind up leasing Duncan out to the Fremen. I like that they actually do this scene because it's giving a setup for meeting Stilgar later, which the original just didn't do. It didn't touch it. It's better than Stilgar just showing up and being like, yeah, Paul can be our leader. Lead us to the jihad. Teach us to yell at stuff. Whatever makes sense. Leto's wandering around again, and he finds Mapes with a knife in her back. Alright, time for Trace's PSA corner. We're already in the corner. Let me present you with a scenario. You're walking across your palace late at night when you find a servant of yours laying on the ground. Approaching her, you realize that she's been stabbed in the back with a knife. What do you do? Do you A, remove the knife, or B, leave the knife in place? Remove the knife? You're dumb. According to safeandsound.uk, emphasis on UK because they know about stabbing, you should leave a knife in place if you find a stab victim. Removing the knife can do more damage on the way out and can unblock any blood vessels or veins that were blocked by the blade. If you do this, it may upset doctors in your local vicinity, who will then shoot you in the neck with a tranq dart and remove your tooth, replacing it with a poison one. Crazy that came from a UK website because usually they don't do any kind of dentistry over there. They don't explain what the tooth does though.
You will have your revenge, my lord, I promise. Just remember, the tooth. The tooth, my lord. When you have the Baron face to face, remember, the tooth.
What's he supposed to do with that? The Harkonnens invade Arrakeen, where Gurney finds out that some of the men attacking them are in fact the Emperor's men, the Sardaukar. I don't know why he thought to check for that, but he did. Now, I was taking notes while I watched this with Avon, and I had written down in my notes, purple guy yells and then explodes. And watching it back, I was spot on. That's exactly what happened. They catch Jessica, and they do this weird scene.
A pity she has to remain gagged. She has such a magnificent mouth.
We know all about your Bene Gesserit witchery, my dear. Perhaps I should cut your vocal cords, and then Piter could have his way with you.
At least he didn't spit on her this time. I mean, at least there's that. Yue asks for his wife back, and they basically do the same scene, except this time, I can't stress how much more diabolical and evil this one feels.
You said you'd free her if I did what you asked. Well, I've done it. So where is she?
Your wife is free, my good doctor. Completely free. Free of her mortal coil. Free of her physical cage. I freed her.
Yue seems a lot more like an innocent man who's just been trapped into doing something evil, and the Baron goes out of his way to show Yue his wife's corpse, which seems unnecessary, but really proves just how evil the Baron is. The dialogue is better. The Baron is just like an idealized version of what Lynch was going for in 1984, I think. He does the classic villain monologue where he gloats over his victory, and he gives Leto the chance to bite down on his tooth. He doesn't bite down on it at a time that makes sense, even though he can fully see where the Baron is in this one. To be fair, Yue didn't explain it at all, so I guess that makes sense. What's more confusing actually is this scene.
Need you more proof of what Heaven's choice is? Atreides is dead, and Harkonnen lives.
I don't have a comment. I don't have anything to say about that.
Father's dead.
Well, that was a very quick progression through the stages of grief. Now you may be asking, Trace, aren't you going to explain how they got out of the binds they were in and how they got into the desert? And I'd explain that if the miniseries did. They're picked up by Duncan in an ornithopter where Duncan gives Paul Leto's signet ring, his ducal signet. Ducal. But oh no, the Harkonnens tracked them back to the siege they were at, so they have to run away again in their ornithopter.
I must remain with the Fremen, my lord, as I promised your father.
Yeah, buddy, well, you also led the Harkonnens to their hidey hole, so I think you're responsible for them in a couple ways. Well, not anymore, I guess, but... Now the Harkonnens are chasing them through a rock pass reminds me of something, but I can't put my finger on it. But they escape into a sandstorm, and that's the end of the first episode, and now there's 2 left. So far, it's a far cry from David Lynch's Dune. When it comes to being bad, this is so much better. I mean, it's a low bar, but it's so much better. Maybe more time does help a little. But then again, I am seeing just better decisions being made. And I've critiqued some, but they're better. We're getting somewhere. But if you want to know if it stays good, you gotta wait for episode 2, so stay tuned. Okay, let's start episode 2. Episode 2 also starts out like a fever dream, just a lot of colors and just a lot going on for sure. Paul and Jessica land in the desert and they find out that Dr. Yue was the traitor. So Jessica throws up a little and they set to walking across the desert. Still not sand walking. I'm genuinely pretty disappointed in that. It was such a cool aspect of the book and they just haven't done it justice in either of these. And I didn't expect Lynch to do it justice, but I mean, this one's supposed to be a little more well-rounded. So I'd like to see just some idea of it. I understand that's like hard to represent on screen and that Villeneuve is an exception because he's a spectacular director, but still. I feel like I'm pronouncing Villeneuve's name wrong, like a lot. Yeah, don't worry, you are. Now we're back on the Emperor's planet. Irulan is upset with the Emperor for using her to make the Atreides feel comfortable.
You used me,
Used you?
sending me to the Duke as a token of your support, making me a courier of your esteemed respect. Or was that your idea, Fenring? That would be something your perverse mind would suggest.
Brother, are you mewing? It's been 8,000 years since that trend started.
There will come a time, daughter, when you will have to shed this naivete of yours and learn what it means to rule an empire.
And when that time comes, Father, you may learn to regret it.
That's a cool moment for Irulan, but knowing her story, I don't think she's gonna do much to him. Paul and Jessica make their way into a cave and Paul sees some rectangles and he turns to his mom and he's like, yo, rectangles aren't just in caves normally, right? Paul has another vision about Chani and then a baby and then bam, he's looking at a little rat. I like this little rat. He seems cool and honestly just like a good time. I would hang out with this rat. But it turns out the baby that he saw was his sister, so he tells his mom that he knows she's pregnant. And he's all upset about the fact that he's visioning.
What have you done to me?
I gave birth to you.
A freak.
No, not a freak.
Then what?
I mean, yeah, you are a freak. But not because of anything you don't have control over, you just act like one. They continue their journey and wind up having to run from a worm, and they run straight into a siege. Same thing as last time. They bump into the Fremen. This time though, the Fremen all hold their guns weird for some reason. Maybe this time instead of Paul teaching them to shout at a gun, you could teach them to hold them. Just look down the sights when you aim, and generally you're gonna have a better time shooting than if you're, shooting from the chest. But yeah, it's basically the same scene as before, except this time they show Jessica using her weirding powers in a lot, I guess, weirder of a way. It kind of looks like Mirage, and it's something that you would expect someone to look at and call witchcraft instead of just being good at fighting. And then she uses the voice on the other Fremen to make them stop shooting at Paul. It's a good thing they don't aim though, because at this point they definitely would have shot him otherwise.
Merciful God. I've heard of the waiting ways. Imagine what a man can do with it.
Alright, buddy. Let's not get too racy off the bat. You just met this woman and you're already saying you could do her job better than her. You don't even know her job. She's just good at something. While this whole scene is done, I would say miles better than what it had the first time, it does look like it was shot in a laser tag arena. Maybe that's what they were going for, but And then Chani finds Paul.
He's here.
And the green dude, it's rough. And this is laser tag. Somebody should have been yelling at Paul not to climb on the terrain. They bring Paul and Jessica to Siege Tabor. I think that's how you say it. Siege Tabor, Siege Tabor. Everywhere I look it up, it says something different, so. And there, they have these lights that turn on when you shake them. And I thought that was cool. Why butt out? Why Fremen butt out? Why Chani boob out? Why is Paul just staring at Chani boob out? Even after she clearly noticed him and is obviously not comfortable with the attention, you have the audacity to keep going.
She's the one, isn't she? The one you've seen in your dreams. I can tell by the way you stare at her.
Yeah, I can tell by the way you stare at her, like... Why are you encouraging him? Don't... You're his mom. You better nip this behavior in the bud. I don't care that he's 25. I don't care. I didn't say it before, but in a scene earlier, Kynes is caught and he's sent out into the desert for the desert to take him. And now we cut to him stumbling out into the desert and he falls down. And then he says...
The pre-spice mass.
And then he explodes. I mean, technically, the pre-spice mass explodes. This is technically book accurate. That is in the book, but they don't explain what the pre-spice mass is, so it kind of just seems like he explodes. Spontaneous explosion. We're back to Siege Tabor. One of the Fremen, Jameis, decides to call out Paul in a fight.
You must step back.
You know what's good for you. You will find an honorable way to leave this thing alone.
Jessica tries to use the voice to stop it, but Stilgar's like, no, you can't do that. So it looks like they're gonna have to fight. In diapers. I can't take this I can't take this seriously. Imagine being threatened by a guy dressed like this. Embarrassing. I would be embarrassed. I would be suffering from secondhand embarrassment if a man threatened me like this. And Paul kills him. And it's not impressive because he's a baby. Imagine being like, who wants to fight me? And this guy's over here like, me. I guess it makes sense. I think they technically had to dress like this in the book because they didn't want to wear their still suits and get them all messed up because, whoever dies isn't going to need it anymore. But oh boy, oh mama. Jessica is really upset that Paul had to kill somebody. And Stilgar's like, well, you know what? That's the way of the Fremen, and one day he's gonna have to kill another guy, and that guy is me. And I guess that's really comforting to her because she looks at him like she's gonna kiss him. I do not understand the sexual tension placed around the character of Jessica. I really think it's misplaced just based on the book. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not a movie maker.
But his water belongs to the tribe.
I was a friend of Jamie's. When the Hawk plane fell upon us, at a hole in the rock, it was Jamie's who pulled me to safety.
I really think a lot of these scenes really make up a decent part of Dune. It's important to have a good understanding of the Fremen because the Fremen kind of are Dune, and they're how Paul is able to be what he is. It's really hard to focus while I'm doing the Fremen gritty. But genuinely, without seeing Paul dealing with the Fremen, we don't really get to understand him as a character. We don't get to understand his connection with the Fremen. We don't get to understand how he copes with killing and how he becomes the person he is. We wouldn't be able to get his motives, and we wouldn't be able to get his metamorphosis from this bratty kid, especially in this version, to the ruthless dictator that he becomes. And I want to specify here, because I don't think I was clear enough, I'm saying this to the credit of the miniseries, because David Lynch didn't do this at all. And frankly, Villeneuve doesn't even do it to the same extent that this one does.
I was a friend of Jameis. He taught me that when you kill, you pay for it.
That said, they do not explain what Paul has paid for this. I would guess in this scenario, the pain is being part of this awkward ceremony where you don't know what to do. Like, why are some people going like this, and some people are going like this and this? It's just different forms of grittying, I guess. But Paul has so much social anxiety from this that he cries, and that really resonates with the Fremen, and with me, actually.
Jameis carried 33 liters of the tribe's water. Counted and measured.
Bro was dry. I couldn't find much on the weight of his actor, but by the looks of him, I'm gonna say he was about 2 inches taller than Paul. Alec Newman, who plays Paul, is about 5'8", so that puts this guy at about 5'10". According to the NHLBI, the average weight for someone about 5'10" is between 132 pounds to 167 pounds. That's an average of about 150 pounds. Now this guy's a Fremen, but I mean, looking at him, he seems like he's an average build. Now according to USGS, water makes up about 60% of our bodies. That's not Dune canon, by the way. According to Dr. Kynes, it's 70.
The human body is 70% water. Surely a dead man no longer requires it.
But going by 60, being generous, that's 90 pounds of water in his case. And that's 41 liters. Being generous. That man only had 33 liters in him. Jameis was bone dry. No wonder he lost to Paul. Brother was coughing up sawdust. Give that man a tear. He needs it. Also, that is not 33 liters. You are not carrying 33 liters like that.
Needs a naming now still.
They decide it's time to name him, and he hits him with this line.
What is the name of that little mouse?
I love this scene every time it's in a Dune because it's so funny every time. I understand why they skipped it in 1984's version. Because it's like, all right, it's time we pick a name for you. Mouse. What? Yeah, what's that little mouse called? You want to be named after a mouse? Because of how small I am? Okay. Dude, I am so little. No, I get it. Because I'm such a little twink. Okay, shut up, man. Look how petite I am. No, I get it. I think maybe you should. This is me trying to drink a regular cup of spiced coffee. Yeah, I'm going to be played by Timothée Chalamet one day. Actually, that's a good point. I actually don't know if twink isn't something we should say. I've seen it thrown around quite a bit. If not, I apologize. Hey Google, is it okay to say twink?
Searching for pictures of Timothée Chalamet.
Okay, we're good. They call a worm, and they ride it to a Fremen place that I forget the name of, but it's got a big statue of the Mahdi. Stilgar informs them that Liet is dead, the Liet Kynes. Mr. Our bodies are 70% water Kynes. And then he tells Paul that Liet was Chani's dad. And he's like, give her some space.
Give her some time, Woody.
So he immediately doesn't give her some space and goes to talk to her immediately. But because he does that, we get this classic line.
Tell me about the waters of your homeland, Morty.
We had rivers of it. Great flowing veins of water. From the snows of mountains into lakes so wide you couldn't see the other side. Oceans of water.
He really has to rub it in, doesn't he? In fact, he rubs it in so bad that she shows him the secret water that the Fremen keep just to cope. Then they do a lot of animation that they were not ready for. They were not prepared to animate this scene. I got so used to seeing the Fremen that it was actually pretty decent whiplash to see Irulan back on the Emperor's planet. She sends this bald lady out to collect intel on Fade Rotha.
I want you to insinuate yourself among the Fat Baron's family.
Jeez, dude, I get he's big. I get he's big. I get it's noticeable. I get that we tend to put the looks of political figures on blast. I get that I've done that in this video already. But please, give it a rest for a moment. I need time for the joke to breathe. You're not even making a joke, actually. You're just describing this man. Imagine every time the Trump was brought up in the news, they referred to him as the Orange Trump. They only did that on Jimmy Kimmel, and everybody hated it. We cut back to Arrakis. Paul is in the thick of it now, ambushing the Harkonnens and stuff. Pretty much the exact same progression that we saw in 84. At this point, Paul has really come into his own as the Lisan al-Gaib and as Muad'Dib. I really like Muad'Dib. I think that's fun to say. My dog's name is Morty, and sometimes I call him Muad'Dib, and he's a little confused, but he gets it. I'm also a little embarrassed that I named him Morty. I was 15 and I really liked Rick and Morty. And then they fired his voice actor and my dog doesn't talk anymore. This time though, Rabban is really mad about it, and instead of gouging one of his own men's eyes out, he kills a bunch of hostages and sends a message back to the bear. Why Baron boob out? The Baron explains to Fade that Rabban is screwing up, but it's okay because he's going to use Fade to swoop in and kind of take control from Rabban and make Fade look really good in comparison.
Fade the savior. They will be cheering in the streets. You can even give them your brother's head as a gift if you like.
That wasn't in the book, by the way. They never talked about decapitating Rabban. They just really loved the idea of decapitating this guy. The Bene Gesserit and the Guild are shown to be growing more concerned about the lack of spice production. As they say in their lingo, it's not flowing. And they depict that in a conversation between two characters in the most ridiculous costumes possible. I don't know how they managed to make a person look so much like Rosalina's observatory, but here we are. It's so big and cumbersome on this lady that she didn't even realize that Irulan was eavesdropping. You're a Bene Gesserit, you're supposed to be able to hear that stuff. Irulan decides that she needs to go to Fade's birthday party, which the Emperor is against until Fenring is like, well, if she seduces Feyd-Rautha, then we can get intel out of him. And I guess that convinces him. Irulan clearly isn't happy with the Emperor though, we got that whole statement from her. I don't know why he would expect her to tell him anything. She was like, Dad, when I have autonomy, I'm going to kill you. And he's like, well, that's all fine and dandy. Now go sleep with this guy and tell me his plans. Paul is now promising the leaders of the Fremen tribes, I believe they're called Naibs, the future that Liet saw for Dune.
I am offering you the future. The future as Liet saw it.
How do you know what Liet saw?
Because I've seen it. Here. And here. And once we rid Arrakis of the vile Harkonnen, we can complete his dream.
Paul is actually a lot more bearable now, I've noticed. It kind of sneaks up on you. As much as I hated him in the first episode, he's kind of growing on me now. I don't mind him. It's the Luke Skywalker effect, I'm telling you. Paul and Chani talk in the garden that they're in.
I had dreams about this garden. Except it wasn't here, it was somewhere else.
Was I there?
Yes. And there were children. Playing. Very happy.
A wonderful dream.
I'm gonna be honest, I find this scene super endearing. And that's kind of impressive because I did not like them or like their dynamic in their first encounter whatsoever. This Chani seems book accurate and kind of adding a new dimension to her character that you just couldn't with the book because acting. They walk out into the desert and Chani explains where the spice comes from with this drawing that doesn't make much sense. And Paul likes this exposition so much that they have sex. And then this old lady shows up. Stop looking. Stop. Thank you. Now we're seeing Paul teach Fremen how to fight with the Weirding Way, and we're seeing more and more Fremen show up to lend their support to him. Now Paul, Jessica, and Chani go to get the worm juice for the transference ritual from the old Bene Gesserit to Jessica. They have to wrestle with this worm, and honestly, that seems like a great job for the Fremen. How many Fremen get to splash around in the water like that? Not many. I also like that the worm is made with practical effects here. I think it's a nice touch. She-Hulk. And the Hulk, you look younger than I remember. Oh, there's more. Why are these children green? What's with the green? Jessica undergoes the worm juicing, and Chani is consecrated as Sayadina. I don't remember what that word means, but it happens, they say it. Now Jessica transmutes the water of life to not be poisonous, and they do this scene without even showing an inside shot of her uterus. Crazy, I know. She also sees the place that only the Kwisatz Haderach can delve into, which they don't really touch in the other movie. And then the other Reverend Mother recognizes that she's pregnant and just barely saves Aaliyah.
Your daughter is in danger. Take her into your arms. She must see all that we see.
Now we're on Gedi Prime. Irulan is there. Funny hat on, of course. And so is the other Bene Gesserit lady, the bald one. She's in full Aang cosplay. Feyd-Rautha is preparing for his 500th kill. This is the scene that we actually introduce Feyd-Rautha with in Villeneuve's version. But Irulan walks in as he's getting... Why fade butt out? Why fade butt out? The book never said he had a butt. Why boob out? How am I supposed to show this on YouTube? I thought he liked men anyway. Specifically men he's related to.
You kissed your dad on the mouth?
Irulan takes over bathing him and basically seduces him for his intel, just like her father planned. My question is, why? Not that she does what her father says, because I think that she would want intel whether or not she's going to give it back to the Emperor. But you sent the other Bene Gesserit lady, the bald one, to do that very thing. So why did you show up? Why are you here? It feels like you're wasting resources and putting yourself at personal risk by showing up there, especially since that's Feyd-Rautha, who is known to be psychotic. She does learn, though, that the Harkonnens used the Sardaukar to attack the Atreides.
Swift and merciless. The Atreides never had a chance. The Sardaukar had the palace sealed within hours.
The Sardaukar.
I sent the final communique to your father, myself.
How stupid is the Emperor? From the beginning, we know he clearly didn't want her knowing that he colluded with the Harkonnens. Yet, he sent her to get intel from someone who would be able to tell her that, that he colluded with the Harkonnens. Why is someone this dumb in charge of the entire known universe? Back on Arrakis, after Jessica is recognized as the new Reverend Mother, they do their spice orgy, but they don't explain what that is, so it's really just an orgy. I legitimately didn't think that's what the spice orgies were, to be completely honest. I thought it was more like a drug ecstasy thing, which I understand could tie in, but that was just my understanding. I might be wrong. Either way, that's not how the makers saw it, so. But you know how Paul sees it? More like this. More macabre, for sure. Wakes him up from his dream, and we get the best transition so far.
History will say that the Fremen were about to find their Messiah. That Paul Atreides would find his revenge.
And then that's it for episode 2. Only one more left. Alright, let's do this one last time. We open up with Chani and Paul talking about how there are certain places that Paul cannot see into. And Chani thinks maybe she should leave the area and go to her son instead. They have a son, by the way. I didn't skim over this. We're learning this together.
I'm sorry, my lord. You said you must come at once.
Feyd apparently tried to poison the Baron with one of his sex slaves or whatever's going on with this guy. The Baron is upset, but he monologues in classic fashion about why he isn't going to kill Feyd for this and why Feyd shouldn't try to kill him.
You see, this is why you need me, Feyd. To help you think, to help you plot. Why do you think I tolerate the incompetence of your brother? Because it amuses me? Think, Feyd. Think.
And they seem to agree not to try and kill each other from here on out.
Good. Now let the Emperor mock House Harkonnen. Call us swine. Because in the end, his throne will be mine.
You know, I really think they should just cut out the middleman here. Yes! By now, Aliyah is like 5, so there's been like about a 5-year time skip. And she's freaking everybody out.
He looks like Misa's son.
How can you know that, child?
She's not as terrifying in this one, I will say. But she's also a little more childlike, which I don't think is how her character was supposed to be.
They stare at me. They whisper when I pass. It hurts my feelings.
You frighten them.
Because I'm a freak.
You're not a freak. Who has said that?
No one.
Then don't you ever say it again. My children are not freaks.
This kind of just seems like a child and her mother, but also good move on Jessica's part to keep her hair this time around. At least I think she did. I can't tell. Again, funny hat. Meanwhile, Paul is having a vision watching a bunch of worms wiggle around until the world turns into a Minecraft flat world and scares them away. But Paul is startled out of his vision by Chani, who has killed a guy for trying to challenge Muad'Dib. It doesn't sit well with him that she's doing the fighting for him, so he decides that it's time for him to ride the worm to prove himself.
Othium, get Stilgar. Tell him to summon a maker. Muad'Dib. There is only one way to stop these challenges.
You know what this will mean? Between you and Still, the man will want you to call him out.
Only if I survive the Maker.
I think this is actually the only book-accurate version of this that we've seen on screen ever. Stilgar explains how to ride the worm.
Just remember what I've taught you. Do it simply and directly, nothing fancy.
I'll remember.
Stand close enough that you can mount when he passes, but not so close he can crush you.
Remember.
Well, you will hear him before you see him. When you take your stand, you must become completely still. You must become a Dune in your very essence.
Still.
I love how Stilgar is always portrayed as the funny guy. Well, not always. I mean, he was funny in a different sense, but...
Won't let it pass through me. Only I will remain.
Me when I ate Taco Bell. He does wind up riding the worm, obviously. It's the same scene as Lynch's, honestly. I didn't mention this before, but in the last episode, Paul recognized Gurney out on a patrol. Now, what's years later, they lay a trap of fake spice, which looks like oregano? Anyway, they lay a trap and Gurney falls for it. They get to reunite, we get the young pup scene.
Paul? Is it truly Paul? Young pup! Young pup! Gurney, man.
Like I said, Patrick Stewart clears with this scene, but...
Muad'Dib, feel the wind.
Muad'Dib? You're the one they call Muad'Dib?
Yeah. Means little rat. Gurney asks what'll happen with his men, and Paul says,
We'll decide what to do with them after the storm.
Maybe we'll kill him. Depends on how I'm feeling, honestly. He brings Gurney back to the Siege, and they talk about what happened over the past 5 years.
I would have gladly have sacrificed myself if I could have taken the traitor with me.
I take back what I said about Jessica. There's sexual tension between everyone. Irulan does come back to report to the Emperor and tells him that basically the Baron is leaving the Fremen alive so that Fade can come in and earn favor.
Perhaps this brutality is simply part of something more cunning. A clever prelude to ripen them up for someone else. Someone to come and rescue them from Raban. Someone like the other nephew. The cute one, Fade.
Really? This guy. He looks like Vanilla Ice. Paul gets attacked by a spy and they wind up catching him. Paul's like, I think this guy's a Sardaukar, and then he checks. If you're gonna use these guys as undercover agents all the time, why are you branding them? Especially in a place that's like so easy to see. I feel like that's counterintuitive. But they decide to let the Sardaukar live, and they send for Jessica, who's in the Southern Siege. We cut back to Irulan.
Muad'Dib never sleeps. They say Muad'Dib never eats. They believe he can see into the future. They believe he cannot be killed.
No one has ever seen him.
No, Highness. Though many claim they have. Sometimes in several places at the same time.
What does he look like? I want to know what he looks like.
No one will say for sure. Perhaps he doesn't even exist. Perhaps he's just a legend. A ghost.
There are no such things as ghosts.
I really like that line. She doesn't say there is no such thing as ghost. She says there were no such thing as ghost. Kinda showcasing how Paul changed everything. The Fremen catch some guild navigators and Paul mogs them.
May I remind you that I am protected by the Imperial Treaties for Commerce, by the Chom Declaration, paragraph 12, subparagraph D, and by Articles 3, 8, and 14 of the Great Convention.
Imperial lies void where Muad'Dib stands.
And sends them back with a message that they're cooked. Chani and Jessica kind of passively bicker over what they want with Paul and Chani's son. And then Jessica tells Chani that she wants Paul to be married to a noble, kind of like what she wanted with Duke Leto. And Chani says that she's going to do whatever is best for Paul. I'll get into this later, but a lot different of a character than she is in Villeneuve's version. Now the Baron goes to the Emperor's home planet and gives a report on the Fremen.
Your Majesty, these people are mad. The women throw their babies at us. They hurl themselves onto our weapons to open a wedge for their men to attack.
Indeed.
I can wipe the planet clean of the entire race.
It seems kind of familiar, doesn't it? Seems kind of similar to a modern rhetoric that we're hearing about an ongoing conflict right now. Genocide is bad, by the way. But from this, even though the Emperor knows that the Baron has kind of engineered this situation to be this way. The Bene Gesserit and the Guild advise the Emperor to crush the rebellion on Arrakis, and the Emperor plans to go to Arrakis himself to draw out Muad'Dib. Now, Gurney attacks Jessica because he thinks that she's the one who betrayed House Atreides.
Thought you'd escape, say which?
Gurney, what are you doing?
I'm your confessor.
Take your hands off me.
Here to unburden your black conscience of guilt before I send you into eternity.
This is actually in the book, and it's only represented in the miniseries. I didn't talk about it, but you get like an inkling that Gurney had a suspicion towards Jessica. They delve way more into it in the book, but like, it's there here. And Paul has to talk him down.
Gurney! I must step, my lord, and I'll finish it right now.
The traitor was Huey, Gurney. No. We have the confession in his own hand. And as soon as you release my mother, you can read it for yourself.
What have I done?
I mean, technically nothing. But Paul is upset by this because he didn't see Gurney's attack coming. So now he wants to send Chani away to the southern siege because he doesn't know if he can see danger to her either.
I want you safe.
I'm safest when we are together.
But I'm not.
He decides to take a worm out to where the worm juice is kept. Wait, what's going on down here? Is he rolling to the door? What? Never mind. Then he gets the worm juice and he really just starts tweaking out. He looks like Elijah Wood whenever he gets stabbed. And then he passes out so hard that when they find him, they consider taking his water, making him into a raisin and a trazin. But Chani kisses him and tastes the water of life on him, so they fix him by giving him more water of life. This part never made that much sense to me in general, but he wakes up and then he makes Jessica vision with him about how important he is and how many people will die.
I am the one who can be many places at once. I am the master of fate. I am the tool of fate.
Meanwhile, the Emperor is on his way to Arrakis now, and Fade weirdly flirts with Irulan.
She'd make a fine trophy on Harkonnen linen, wouldn't she?
Gross. Now that Paul is fully awake, he addresses the Fedaykin and gets them ready for battle. And all the Fedaykin try to convince him to call out Stilgar. He doesn't want to do that. In fact, he forgoes being the Naib altogether and decides to just become the Duke of Arrakis.
You say I am the Mahdi. I say I am your dupe!
The Fremen seem to like this. They all start cheering, and Paul gets so excited that he starts peeing. But they really like that too. Now Paul sends the Fremen to put the remaining water of life on top of the largest pre-spice mass they can find. I guess that gives a reason for Liet's death scene, because all we know about pre-spice mass is that it explodes. And I guess Chani did explain that they also make spice, so that's all we need, spice and explode. Paul enshrines Leto's skull in a rock wall, and then we see Leto's ghost for a second. I think the main point of this scene is to confirm that Jessica is in fact not bald. She did not shave her head. Jessica says she's concerned for what Paul has planned for the universe, and Paul hints toward a jihad. She's like, your father would have never said something like that, and he basically like red herrings it and avoids it by being like, you know, we're not all our fathers. You're not your father, who was the Baron, by the way, in case you didn't know. And she's like, no, so he's like,
look into my eyes.
Brother, do you expect her to see any resemblance? You're mainly bones, and even if you weren't, your eyes are a luminescent blue. Now, Aliyah sees the ships coming to bomb the siege.
They're coming.
They're what? The Sardaukar are here too. By the way, I hate their guns so much. I guess they're going for like a Gatling gun look, but if they don't shoot like a Gatling gun, then why do you have them? One barrel is plenty on a gun. Sometimes guns have two. Not that often. Now we see a Fremen woman running away with Paul's son, and the Harkonnens catch her. Crazy way to portray that. I guess I can't think of a better way, but that's, that's something. I think it was the scream at the end that really did it for me. It's an interesting choice. Now, Paul sends over the terms of the Emperor's surrender on the Sardaukar that he captured.
These are terms for surrender.
They killed my son. I can't do this. You have no choice.
The Emperor is unimpressed with it, and he's like, here's an answer. We caught his little freak.
So, he wants an answer, does he?
So, here he is, the fat Baron himself. He's not much, is he?
What is this? Some kind of midget?
What kind of question is that? That's obviously a child. I look at this person, and there is not a doubt in my mind that this is a child. Just a kid. It's not even that weird for a kid to say a line like that. Have you ever brought a kid to a Walmart? Children love body shaming. They threaten to kill Aaliyah, and she's like, actually, no, I'm scary, just ask her.
Kill her! Kill her now. She's the abomination. The one the ancients warned us about.
You know, I just realized how this Reverend Mother here is not believably old at all. Like, yeah, this is obviously a wig, but there's no shot that this lady is broken like 50 yet. In the 1984 version, we kind of get a setup for how the Emperor learns that Paul is Muad'Dib, but in this one, Irulan just knows that Aaliyah is an Atreides somehow.
Look at her father. Can you not see it? She is the daughter of Duke Leighton. She is Atreides. Her brother is the Duke's son, Paul.
And that's pretty cool, if only that revelation made any sense. How did you know that? Now, the Fremen break the shield wall, and while everyone's distracted, the Baron tries to grab Aaliyah. So she pokes him with the poison needle with the Gom Jabbar.
I have Your Majesty!
Also, where did his tooth go? You see that? I don't remember his tooth being missing before this. I guess he doesn't need a tooth anymore though, because he's dead. He's just floating there. It's way less over the top, but also just a lot funnier than his death in Lynch's version. We go on to what becomes a very long fight scene. Avon made a very good point that the Harkonnens were fighting hand to hand for no reason. They have guns. Stupid guns, but they're still guns. I don't care how stupid my gun looks, I'd rather have that than a knife. You know what they say, never bring a stupid gun to a knife fight. And you might be thinking, well, maybe the guns just aren't good at close combat, or maybe they're hard to use. No. Stilgar like upgrades to one without ever having held one before. The Harkonnens are just dumb as rocks. They're getting into dogfights now. The Harkonnen ornithopters actually look like ornithopters, which kind of makes me mad. Why not just have everyone have... Why are you doing different ornithopters? I get like they're colored different, but like they should all have like wings. They're fighting inside the city, still with their hands for some reason. Everyone's exploding, lots of slow-mo fun. It's like watching a Zack Snyder movie. After the fighting dies down a little bit, we see Raban walking into the streets, and it seems like it's entirely empty. But then he does a, they're right behind me, aren't they, like 3 times. Like he turns around to face the people behind him one way, and every time he does that, there's a new group of people behind him on the other side. And then, this scene. Why do they love decapitating this guy so much? Listen, I know he looks like he's asking for it. Just look at the guy. It doesn't have to be every time. It wasn't in the book. He doesn't even have hair to hold his head by this time. Like, what are we gonna like bare knuckle it? And man, that kid was skilled at it. I imagine it's hard to cut off a human head. Nobody even noticed. They were still trying to stab his decapitated corpse. Paul's back at his palace now. I threw up. Chani's still upset about their kid who died, and Paul takes a moment aside to comfort her.
He can never be replaced, Cheney. There will be other children.
Is it over?
No, obviously not. Are you stupid? We haven't even seen the Emperor yet. You knew he was coming here. Man, all it takes is one child of hers to die and her brain's out the window. No, it's not over until he goes full-on karate mode and sits on the Emperor's throne. Why are his dogs out? Were there no regal shoes? Even Gunter over here has shoes on. Get a grip, Paul. I mean, I guess you can get a much better grip now, but...
Dispatch orders to your navigators. They are to depart our space and return the fleet to its homes immediately.
The Guild does not take your orders.
You didn't have to do that. You could have just said that without doing this.
Tell them to look into the future. They will see me staring back at them.
Why is Jessica standing like that? Paul's got his dogs out. Aaliyah's being a general gremlin down there. The guild guys are doing aerobics every time they speak. And now Jessica looks like she's mentally preparing to jump off a high dive. Can we all just act a little more normal? No wonder everyone wants to kill each other in this story. Everyone's insufferable. I hope the ship they're on just explodes. I hope they die! Speaking of exploding, Paul reveals his plans with a pre-spice mass. That he's gonna flood the worm's nest if his plans aren't met and basically destroy all spice forever. And then Irulan's like, well, I guess you should just marry me then.
Father, here is a man fit to be your son.
She straight up offers herself up in this one, a lot different than Florence Pugh's version. And then it seems like Jessica actually wants Paul to decline.
Paul, do not interfere, Mother. This is for the good of us all.
But then Chani stops her. Way different dynamic. I have some serious thoughts about this, but I'll save them because I have serious thoughts about Chani in general, and I want to discuss that later. Talking like a guild navigator now. Now, Fade challenges Paul for the sake of the Emperor and for Irulan's hand in marriage. And Paul goes,
May thy knife chip and shatter.
Okay, here it is. He's not going to say it, is he? Well, now I won't root for him.
Paul, don't do it.
If you're worried about people thinking you're a little freak, how about you never do that again? Everyone who's a freak here acts like it on purpose, I swear. These Atreides will just be like, I'm a freak, and then they'll intentionally do freakish things. This is your fault. You're doing this. Nobody thinks you're a freak for being a smart kid. Your mom's a Bene Gesserit. Everybody expects that. They think you're a freak because you act like this. How about you don't act like this? Anyway, they start to fight. You know, if I were Fade, my strategy would be to stomp Paul's dogs because they're... Why are his dogs out too? Why did he take his shoes? Oh, when did he take his shoes off? When did he have the chance to take his shoes off? Editing Trace, I want you to show me a through line. I want you to fast forward through the last time we see him with shoes all the way to this point. When did he take his shoes off? I don't think he took his shoes off. Bro's got tearaway shoes. Freak. All these guys are freaks. Everyone's a freak here. The fight isn't too bad. At least they're not in diapers this time. There's a lot less knifing in this and a lot more jumping around. Eventually, Fade gets Paul down and he reveals his, like, a little poison belt buckle that he's gonna stab him with. And then Paul goes,
It's over. Cousin.
And for the life of me, I can't tell what happened here. Like, how did he get out of that? Did he just use confusion on him with that cousin line? Was it just super effective? Fear might be the mind killer, but bewilderment is the whole guy killer. Everybody's shocked. Nobody knows what to do, especially this guy. He clearly never knows what to do, though, judging by his headwear choices. Irulan stays in the middle of the room while the Emperor walks out, sadly. Meanwhile, Paul returns to Chani, which is showcasing, I think, where his heart and true loyalties lie. And we end with a monologue from Jessica as Paul and Chani walk off into the desert night.
You see her standing there, so haughty, so confident. Let us hope she finds solace in her writing and her books. She'll have little else. She may have my son's name, but it is we, the ones who carry the name of concubine, that history will call wives.
And we did it, Dune. I mean, dude, that was all the pre-9/11 Dunes. Now, the same team made a Children of Dune series, but since we haven't gotten that far in the Villeneuve movies, I won't worry about that right now, maybe someday. But now, the last Dune had a common thread. Something that really tied the previous one to this one in a very tight package. You already know what I'm talking about, obviously. It was the pug. Now, those pugs showed us the future of Dune. Something we needed to hold out for. A beacon of hope for better things to come. And I was hoping to find something similar for this miniseries, but I wasn't seeing anything. What could possibly be the tie that binds? What could possibly lay bare the future of... Wait a minute. What did I mention the most about this miniseries? What kept coming up over and over? It was all them darn boobs and butts that were out. I know what I have to do. Just like before, I had to map out where they all appeared on screen. After hours of work, I was finally able to come up with this. Not what I expected. I don't know what this means. I'll stew on that later. For now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go watch the post 9/11 Dunes before I give my thoughts on all of them. Be right back. This is my best rendition of a professor of literature, by the way. Just thought I could seem more credible than just a YouTuber who talks at a camera. Not that I'm ashamed to be that, I've learned there's times to keep that to yourself. You know, keep a little credibility. I've learned it's not a first date discussion. So yeah, Evan and I watched them again, and I'd like to say before I even get started here, whoa. If you know me, especially if you know me personally, you know that I love movies. They're just a medium that's always resonated with me. I felt very deeply affected by a lot of movies. And because of that, I want to say that very few movies affect me in the same way that Dune does. I mean, I can gush over these movies for hours. In fact, I've gushed over this movie for the past month in making this video. And because of that, I have to come right out and say that the previous two iterations of Dune do not hold a shaky glow orb to Denis Villeneuve's masterpieces here. And I know that begs the question, why am I here? Why have I spent what's probably something close to an hour of your time and over a month of my own making this video that likely very few people will see all the way through? Just to screw around, just to make jokes about the poor production quality or the odd directorial decisions of the previous iterations? Not quite. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm very happy to have fun with this, and I clearly have. That's the purpose of this channel. But the common failures of Dune are just that, common. I want to talk about this because nothing holds a candle to the modern Dunes. Because these previous iterations had so many roadblocks and failed in so many ways, and yet we can look to these modern movies and compare them to something like The Lord of the Rings. Almost in the same way that you could originally compare the Dune books to the original Lord of the Rings books. The fact that falling short with an adaptation of something so well loved was common. Starting with a failure that was so massive that it never even hit the silver screen. And then another failure so abysmal that it marred the name of Dune until the next century. And even with the miniseries, which clearly learned from past mistakes, but still wasn't able to turn into that Star Wars for adults that Lynch saw the original Dune to be. Well, to answer that, I think we have to look at where these other adaptations obviously fell short. First up, obviously, is Dune 1984, and this is gonna be like fish in a barrel. Sand trout in a barrel, I guess. First off, this movie was crazy ugly. There's no doubt about it. I don't care what year it was in, there was no reason to make me look at this. And you know what? Even with the technological limitations of the time, they still weren't operating within their means here. Because in 1984, Gene Siskel from At the Movies wrote, "It's physically ugly. It contains at least a dozen gory, gross-out scenes. Some of its special effects are cheap, surprisingly cheap, because the film cost a reported $40 to $45 million, and its story is confusing beyond belief. In case I haven't made myself clear, I hated watching this film. The editing was weird, the pacing was off. This movie began as the slowest thing ever and then was super rushed at the end. Lynch planned to have more movies and then stuff was cut. I get that. Still bad. The dialogue was grindy and over the top. Even when the characters' mouths stopped moving, they still kept yapping.
She's using the voice.
Insane decisions were made for inclusion, like the weirding module, while at the same time, huge portions of the original story were either skipped or glossed over. A lot of that weirding module time could have been directed toward other things, but it wasn't. A lot of those scenes with the nasty guild navigator could have been cut. We could have had time with the Fremen, if we wanted to. The Fremen could have actually meant something, but instead, the Fremen, who were the core of Dune, were reduced to actually nothing. We could have seen Jameis, we could have seen Paul's development, but we didn't get that. And I think that points to the biggest failing of Dune 1984. It had no respect for its subject material. Don't get me wrong, Some things are done right, but not the core message of the story. The core message of a false and reluctant Messiah is completely skimmed over, to the point where Paul turns into a real Messiah and actually brings water to Dune. But as I said before, and I'll mute this for the sake of spoilers yet again, I think if you fumble that hard, maybe you're missing the point. And an odd choice at the end, I don't think necessarily ruins the movie, but it's indicative of the approach taken with the rest of the movie. Dune wasn't Dune for Dune. Dune 1984 was made to be its own thing, in the same way that Star Wars was made to be its own thing and was derived from Dune. But it's a lot harder to truthfully be your own thing when you've taken the name, likenesses, and same skeleton of a story from the original book. All of a sudden, you have a lot of gaps in the shell of a story that you can't nicely fill. And you know what? He couldn't. And he didn't. So his approach was to do Dune without truly doing Dune, because at the end of the day, I don't think they believed that they could translate the book to film. So that leads us on to the next one. What about Dune 2000? You know, starting out, I had different complaints than what I ended with. At first, I was irritated with the character design and the costume design and the graphics. Like I said, I watched it before I watched the old movie. Don't get me wrong, those things weren't perfect in this version, but comparatively, they were a walk in the park. I think that they were so right for trying to give themselves more time to work with. In that way, they had a little better of an ability to respect the original material. And I think that was the first little 1-2 step into making a good adaptation of Dune. And don't get me wrong, it is a bit much. Some things were cut. A lot of things were cut. It was taken from a book. But even some of the things that were preserved often felt clumsy. In fact, the main example that I can think of wasn't even really cut at all, as much as it was replaced. That was, like I mentioned before, Irulan going to Gady Prime to seduce Feyd-Rautha. In the book, that was done by Margot Fenring after his gladiator scene. But in this one, the gladiator is barely touched, and ultimately, more content was then added with Irulan. We got to see more of Paul's character development. Yeah, it was a little annoying at first, but ultimately it felt very natural and well done. We get to see a lot of Fremen culture too. All of a sudden, they go from being little more than minions. They go from being a little more than M-words to actually being a fleshed out people with genuine motivation and tied to the story instead of being this walking, talking, fighting plot device. We see how they live and how their customs really matter to them and how they impress upon Paul and how Paul takes them on as part of his identity as Muad'Dib and as the Lisan al-Gaib. But that extra time they get is also a bit of a pitfall. When I was writing this script, I was getting a little frustrated with the amount of times that we cut back to Gady Prime. And I was thinking to myself, like, we're going back here, but we're not really getting rewarded for the plot. Mainly, it feels like we're being reminded that the Baron exists, reminded that he's evil yet clever, reminded that Feyd-Rautha is this mean, conniving boy. And the truth is, it wasn't just there to remind us, it was there to try and fit into the story that Frank Herbert wrote, where he had an entire book and time to flesh out these little plot branches. But with the way that we kept cutting back to Gady Prime, it felt trivial because even though we had enough time to see the basics of it, we didn't have enough time to actually interact with the characters and get a feel for why we're seeing this in the first place. The core of what was happening was still there, but it wasn't really substantive without the extra 10 to 11 hours that book had, that it would need to be a one-to-one recreation. Even with the content that it trimmed down to, it still dragged a little at times. I'm sure you noticed that a bit, and I'm presenting you with a very, very abridged version. Like I mentioned, Avon and I read the books, and I think that helped. I'm glad that Clayton wasn't there because I think he would have just been bored. We already had the information to fill in a lot of the gaps that needed to be filled in to make it interesting, where Clayton didn't have that, and somebody who hadn't read the books before also wouldn't have that. There's a lot of jargon in this. It suffered a lot from a similar problem that The Phantom Menace suffered from. And yeah, I'm sure it took a little license from the success of The Phantom Menace to have those long talks about political climate and the geological processes of Arrakis. It just seems like this series feels a little grindy at times. I'm watching a TV show, not playing Red Dead Online. That was for all my Red Dead Online fans out there. I'm sorry you exist. While something can be true to the story, it may not be the best experience for the viewer. Let's go back to that Wired quote that I said several years ago at the beginning of this video. It has 4 appendices and a glossary of its own gibberish, and its action takes place on 2 planets, one of which is a desert overrun by worms the size of airport runways. Lots of important people die or try to kill each other, and they're all tethered to about 8 entangled subplots. Dune was at times difficult to digest for its reading audience. How much more difficult is it going to be for a viewing audience? So what's the answer here? We're not happy with the shortened version, where a lot of substance is cut and changes are made to the original story. We're not blown away with the lengthy version, even though it gives us just about every facet of the story of the book and remains faithful to the characters and the world building. But I thought that was the issue, right? That they didn't stick to the script? That they didn't give it the time that they needed? Well, being true to the original is a massive deal if you want to tell the same story and present the same concept as the original. But that doesn't mean that you have to be shot for shot. Maybe it's possible to use artistic license and directorial know-how to make Dune palatable on the silver screen without Jodorowsky's idea of violating book and author.
I was raping. Raping like this.
And that is where Denis Villeneuve comes in. So, I'm not going to do a play-by-play when it comes to the final adaptations. I'm just going to talk about what worked so well with Villeneuve's movies. And we'll start with what I've been alluding to. Villeneuve was able to trim fat beautifully. So let's look at how he did that, and we'll start small. There's this scene soon after Paul comes to Arrakis. He wanders out into the courtyard where he comes across this Fremen watering some palm trees. Fremen tells Paul that he shouldn't be out at this hour, and Paul just says, but the Fremen are. He asks about the palm trees and learns that they take an insane amount of water to keep alive. He's like, well, should we remove them then and save the water? To which the Fremen replies, oh no, these are sacred. It's an old dream. So what does this scene do? First, it characterizes the early version of Paul. Paul, much like his father, has a very strong sense of justice. In a way, he wants to be equal to the Fremen, and he deflects concerns for his own person with, well, you're not concerned for them.
You shouldn't be out here this hour of the day. They're out here.
Second, it introduces how costly it is to keep plant life around on Arrakis. You may be thinking, okay, well, the miniseries did that too, and you'd be right. It fully did, complete with an entire page of exposition on what the Arrakeen Garden was and why it was important, where we already had to introduce Kynes and explain their plan for Arrakis. Thirdly, it shows that the Fremen are not content with the state of Arrakis. They don't want it to remain a desert. The palm trees show that yes, it's costly, even to the extent of being costly toward human lives.
Each one of these drinks every day the equivalent of 5 men. 20 palm trees. 100 lives.
But that's a sacrifice the Fremen are willing to make. They're willing to trade lives for their paradise. I think that this scene really showcases respecting the source material and knowing your limits. There are other examples of this. The family atomics are a pretty good example. They're an addition, but they replace a much more jargon-filled plot point that really only exists to fulfill its own point. That point being the pre-spice mass. I clowned on the pre-spice mass in the miniseries, but I genuinely laud their attempt to include it. The difference here is you don't have to present another tidbit of information for audiences to wrap their heads around and log for future reference. You already know what atomics do just by the name. When Paul threatens to destroy the spice, you don't have to think, oh, I get it because Paul had all the water of life placed on a pre-spice mass. And the water of life is very volatile when it reacts with a pre-spice mass. And therefore, upon eruption, it would effectively kill an entire generation of sandworms, effectively killing the entire spice production, and therefore destroying an entire generation's supply of spice. I think it's a really easy alternative without being too reductionist. It serves the same purpose in the story, but it doesn't confuse itself with too much jargon. Similar to this, I think of Kynes and Chani. I want to focus on characters as their own category later, but Chani was changed drastically in regards to the plot, and really so was Kynes. In the book and the other 2 adaptations, Kynes was a man and was the father of Chani. When I was reading the book for the first time, I'd already seen Dune Part 1, and I was genuinely confused as to who Kynes was supposed to be in the movie. And I think that's a good thing. Why? Because I don't think we were really supposed to connect her that much with her counterpart in the book. And by extension, we weren't really supposed to connect her that greatly with Chani. Really at all with Chani. It didn't change that much for Kynes as a character, but it allowed for a lot more open of an end for Chani as a character. Unlike in the book, she's not like heavily committed to the idea of Paul being the Messiah. In fact, she's actively against the idea. And not having her father be the leader of the ecological renovation of Dune makes that a lot easier. Now she's even from a completely separate tribe from the northern tribes, which is a completely different group of people who don't really even believe in the Lisan al-Gaib. She's still part of it, and so far she's played a very similar role, but now her character can hold moral objections to what Paul will become, and has become so far in just this movie, and gives those who've read the book a little bit of a loose end to anticipate for what Villeneuve will do with it. I have absolutely no idea how her story will resolve, because she's clearly on a much different path than her counterparts. Now that part particularly, I'm not saying makes it necessarily better or worse. I don't think we can say that until we see what they do with her, but I am more invested now at the very least. A lot of things were changed for the sake of timetable. For instance, Aaliyah, she does exist and we see her in a vision, but unlike the other iterations, she's not around during the end of Dune Part 2. I think part of that was because they realized how difficult it was to depict a fully conscious baby. You guys remember Fully Conscious Baby? Me! Terrifying. But that's the point, it's unsettling. That baby was unsettling. And that baby was fully real. No hate to Fully Conscious Baby, by the way here. Adorable. Scary that you're so good at talking though. I think it's just difficult to find a way to depict something like that to an audience without giving the audience the shivers. And I could be talking out of nowhere here, like they could be including her in the next movie as a baby. I'm just assuming they're not. On top of that, you completely have to change the timetable when it comes to Aaliyah. You have to give her time to become a toddler so she can kill the Baron, and that adds years into the mix. Paul and Chani have time to have a child, and clearly that's not the dynamic that Villeneuve wanted to have with them. In the original, the death of Paul's child is the reason why he decides to forgo all mercy. In this, it's really more about the destruction of Sietch Tabr. And I think that's a very intentional change that both fits within the timetable that Villeneuve wanted and shows how dedicated to the Fremen Paul is now. One that was smaller in the book and in every other iteration was Paul and Jameis's dynamic. That was changed. And I think absolutely for the better. I mean, it was also changed in the 1984 version, and by changed, I mean non-existent. He's seen Jameis before he even meets him. And when they meet, all Jameis tries to do for him is kill him. In Paul's visions, he's telling him over and over that he's going to teach him the ways of the desert.
You have much to learn. I will show you the ways of the desert.
And sure enough, he did. And Paul holds on to that even into the next movie. He even calls upon Jameis before taking of the water of life. Because that first death is Paul's guide through the desert, and ultimately to the many other deaths that will stem from that moment. At their fight scene, Paul is taught the way of the Fremen and assimilates into the Fremen right then and there. Chef's kiss. I don't even know how you managed to spin something so perfectly. Now, there are more changes like these made, and I'm not going to go over every single one of them. My point here is that Villeneuve is making these cuts and changes, but he's not doing that to do his own thing. Instead, he's trying to elevate what Herbert did with his original writing. And before we move on, I want to showcase this with, I think, the biggest and most climactic example of how he does this, and that's when Paul kills the Baron. Like I mentioned before, Aliyah's not in the picture when this happened. Usually it's Aliyah who kills the Baron with the Gom Jabbar, but since she's not present, Paul just stabs him. But the reason I'm bringing this up is when he stabs the Baron, he says, "You die like an animal." And rewatching this, I realized for the first time why they usually kill the Baron with the Gom Jabbar. Because the Gom Jabbar is supposed to be used to weed out the humans from the animals. And it's making this statement about the Baron who has given himself so much to hunger and desire that he's lost his humanity and he's become an animal. And in doing that, found his ultimate downfall. I didn't get that before, and maybe that's just a me thing, and I'm stupid and I should have gotten that. But I think that very much elevates Herbert's writing. Again, maybe that's just because Villeneuve basically held my hand and explained it. Maybe I'm not media literate, I don't know. I keep talking about the characters here, and I think it's only right that I segue into talking about what I think made the character writing so good in this. The new movies have much better character writing than the old ones, and you may be thinking like, okay, but they're the same characters. And yes, they are, but their portrayals are so much better in this. Villeneuve is such a master at casting these characters. For example, Timothée Chalamet absolutely kills as Paul. I cannot picture another Paul. He usually plays these very young characters who are generally smart and full of a lot of potential, but tend to be underestimated. So not only was he an amazing actor to begin with, but he fits the role perfectly. And I think that initial expectation is part of what makes his rally with the Southern Fremen so much more powerful. powerful. He doesn't seem like the type of guy who can wield that kind of power. He doesn't look like the type of guy who could wield that kind of power. He doesn't act like the type of guy who could wield that kind of power until he does. And that acting combined with good direction and good character writing really lets him convey that new spin on the character, who wants to do right and wants to fight for the people, but he also has this deep-seated rage and resentment for his lot in life that he ultimately lets drive him more than his desire to do what's right. The Baron is a very similar case, I think. Both other iterations take a very similar approach to making him a cartoon villain. I don't want to say similar. It's the same idea, but one does it much better. Because the 1984 version made him just insufferable. He's disgusting, he's one-dimensional, where the 2000s version gave him a little more depth, but he's still overall wacky. Stellan Skarsgård is so much different than these two. He's intimidating, he's cunning, he's cold. He's still disgusting. Fun fact, the reason that he did the oil bath thing is because Villeneuve had a dream that the Baron was a hippo coming out of mud. But it's still watchable. He's not a gross out character, he's just a gross character. Same thing with Feyd-Rautha, but just in a different scope. He's not annoying or bratty, but he's still obviously a playboy, and he's still very obviously evil. There's nothing endearing about him. Irulan isn't trying to make a plea for his case. He's not boyish. He's clearly a monster, and he's spectacular at it. He survived the pain box, he survived the Gom Jabbar. He's a monster, yes, but he's no animal. Well, not in most senses. I don't like that he looks at the camera after he does that. I don't like that. I think one of the best actors in the entire franchise is Javier Bardem. I didn't even realize that he was the same actor as Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men. And that's because he has such a massive range. He makes Stilgar leagues better. And there aren't really that many things that I can say about what makes him better, he just is. Mainly, he's presented in a much less cardboard way. I didn't mind his portrayal in the miniseries, but it's just, you can't beat this one. And I really think it just comes down to his acting. Also, I really like Stilgar's character. He's my favorite Dune character. I could go on. I love every casting choice made here. The only one I have the slightest problem with is Chani, honestly. I think Zendaya is a killer actress, and she does a good job in just about everything she's in. I do think, though, that she often plays almost the exact same character, and that's not a bad thing, but I think generally she's typecast. And I haven't seen everything she's in, so I can't say that for sure. And you can't always have an actor change their entire acting style. Like, I mean, they only got so far with Walken.
Baron, have you ever investigated the South, regions of Arrakis?
I just think it's a bit of tonal whiplash to have this very American-seeming woman in the midst of all these desert dwellers. Like, I bet I could ask this Chani to recite the Pledge of Allegiance verbatim and she would know it to a T. Probably because she had to recite it every day in school. She seems like she knows exactly what fashion American kids are into these days. Okay, well, maybe not exactly. But I really don't want to sound like I'm knocking Zendaya because I genuinely do enjoy her performance even in Dune, and I like her character. I just think that, like, she's the only Fremen who doesn't even have an accent. And I don't know why. I get that she was supposed to be like a counterpart to Paul and a love interest, but listen, you can date someone with a different accent than you. I know, I don't mean to upset anyone. I don't want to get too, liberal on this channel. I already said genocide was bad. Don't want to be too woke. But I also think that it's okay to date someone with a different accent than you. You can cancel me all you want. Hand in hand with this, I think the relationship between the characters really shine under Denis V's direction. One of the first dynamics we get to see, like, really build up is the relationship between Paul and Gurney. The same beats are hit, but they seem to both actually care for and respect one another. And Paul and Duncan's relationship comes shortly after, and they have kind of this brotherly relationship. Still something the series tried to go for, but here we're given this very organic dialogue between them.
Duncan.
A boy.
Hey. Hey. Paul, boy. So you're going to Arrakis tomorrow with the advance team?
Yes, I'm going to Arrakis tomorrow with the advance team.
I'd like you to take me with you.
You would? That's too bad, because no.
Now, this is something that I think is a little more of a modern phenomenon, and unfortunately, I think I have to refer to it as the MCU effect. A lot of that just comes with Jason Momoa. He kind of has that vibe. But it's having these unserious and kind of banter-filled moments between these characters. And it's in an otherwise non-comedy driven story. I think that builds a good rapport between characters. Now, that's not so much something that the MCU does so well anymore, but especially like back in the days of RDJ being in the MCU, it really like built up and connected you to these characters, really endeared them to the audience. And I think that's impressive, especially like from the perspective of someone who's otherwise not that relatable, like a billionaire playboy genius or the son of a wealthy duke, or someone as attractive as Timothée Chalamet. Wish I could have entered in that contest, man. I'm not even close. I don't look anything like that guy. Budget obviously does a lot for Dune. Some of the most grandiose cinema I've ever seen has come from these movies. And obviously that type of thing does not come at no expense. Besides the fact, like I mentioned, the cast is so good, and that's because it's so star-studded, and that's not cheap in and of itself. Just wait until they cast RDJ as like Moneo or something in a future Dune movie, then it'll be expensive. But the modern Dune movies had a collective budget of almost $400 million, with Dune Part 1 at $170 million and Dune Part 2 at almost $200 million. That's almost 10 times what Dune 1984 had, which was about $40 million. Adjusted for inflation today, it's more like $127 million, but that's still more. Comparatively, the 2000s miniseries had a budget of $20 million, which adjusted for inflation is $34 million. So that explains some of the VeggieTales animation. But having a big budget like that allows modern movies to have a very large and immersive feeling world with amazing set designs and costumes and cinematography that wouldn't be possible with less of a budget. And especially with cinematography and with CG, a lot of it does come with the times as well. Like the CG is just better. There's a point where I think we've kind of reached a pinnacle with, how do I put this? I don't think anyone in 20 years will look at this and think, man, that aged poorly. My brain can look at this and go, wow, that's a real thing. That's a real thing that I have to worry about and factor into my everyday life now. I hate sand now and I'm scared. Another example, I think I complained about the eyes in the miniseries a little bit. There's a reason I did that. And it's because somebody had to go into each individual frame and paint them. And at a point, they just got lazy and didn't want to do it fully. In Dune Part 2, they were able to use AI to rotoscope the eyes. First time I've ever seen a useful application of AI in art, and it was just to change the color of something. Here's hoping we leave it at that. No more generative AI. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. That's in Dune. I'm going to start commenting that on every AI slop video I see. So that's it. That's what makes a good Dune. Just a good team, a good understanding of the craft, and a deep pocket. I mean, yeah, obviously. But that's no small feat, and I don't think having one of those guarantees you the other. Because ultimately, I think you can understand what the other directors did wrong, and you can understand what you should do to get it right. You can have the right team, you can have a good budget, but you're going nowhere if you don't have a good director. At some point, as a director, I think you just have to get good. And that's not to insult the other directors. Like, obviously, David Lynch is a, masterclass. But I want to look at a couple scenes here. Not scenes that were changed from the book, not scenes that were added in or altered in any way, just straight out of the book. Scenes that all of these directors took a genuine crack at. Close your eyes and envision this. It's a tense scene. Paul Atreides walks into the room. Reverend Mother Gaius Ellen Mohiam is sitting in the middle of the room, expectant, demanding. At her side, she has a small box. You know what's coming. You know that he's about to be tested. But wait, something's different. You sense a disturbance in the Force, or sorry, wrong franchise. You sense a disturbance in the spice, I guess, in the voice. 3 different paths open up before you, and 2 of them are significantly uglier and less well made than the third one. You follow the first thread first. The Reverend Mother calls out to Paul, commanding him to come over to her with the voice. You know she's using the voice because you hear Paul think, she's using the voice. He resists, and Mohiam thinks there's strength there. Again, you know she thinks that because you hear her think it. She commands him again, and he obeys this time. He kneels in front of her, and she tells him to put his hand inside the box. He asks why, and she explains what it is, and why she'll kill him if he resists. She explains it, in fact, in very, very vivid detail with no stone left unturned. You get it. He gets it. He puts his hand in the box. She's even so kind as to give him a verbal play-by-play of exactly what he's feeling as he feels it. That way, he can know exactly what he's feeling. Now he tries talking, but she makes him shut up because now it's time for him to speak with his mind to the audience. You can hear his inner monologue as he recites "Fear is the Mind Killer." Great song by Jesse Wells, by the way, you should check it out. And now, not only can you hear his thoughts, but you can see them. You can see him imagining his hand getting all nasty and burnt. That way, you know it hurts. You see Paul getting increasingly shaken, growing closer and closer to being unable to bear it. And just when it seems like he can't take any more and he's just seconds away from breaking, she relents and lets him remove his hand from the box. She says that no one has ever been able to withstand that much. She explains that it takes a true human to be able to withstand such pain. Then you hear her think to herself, could he be the one? Now, looking back on the first path, what do you see? What problems did it have? On the surface, the exposition was insane and definitely distracting. This scene would have been much better if it were exactly the same, just without the inner monologues, and likely less even of what was said out loud. Now, there may be more to dive into, but you feel two pathways calling out to you still. You take the second one. This one has a different tone. This time, Paul doesn't meet her alone. With him is his mother, Jessica. The Reverend Mother says he has the face of his mother but bears the eyes of his father. Maybe a little bit of symbolism? She commands him to walk over and he just crosses his arms. You feel a little frustrated with how bratty he seems. She tries to use the voice on him and he still doesn't comply. Jessica tries to step in and the Reverend Mother dismisses her. Paul is upset by this and asks why she's being treated as a servant. She tells him she was one until his father took her at the ripe age of 16. This seems awfully grindy to you. Also, the 16 thing makes you a little uncomfortable. The Reverend Mother attempts the voice on Paul again, which doesn't work, and this time he replies with his own voice. You begin to wonder if the Reverend Mother is really all that because she's losing to a teenage boy. She points out a much cooler looking version of the box than what you saw before. Instead of commanding Paul to place his hand in the box, she tricks him to put his hand in the box. Because even though he may be very strong-willed, he is nonetheless very stupid. This time you can mostly see inside the box, but you can also see from his perspective where he imagines his hand being burnt, just like before. The Reverend Mother seems to relish in this quite a bit, and Paul squirms a little, but eventually controls himself with his fear is the mind killer mantra. He actually kinda looks like Jesse Wells. Good song though. When she's satisfied, she relents, and Paul sees that his hand is fine. Jessica walks in, and Paul whines and storms off. Yet, despite his brattiness, you can tell that this scene played out in almost the exact same way. But this one is better. You weren't bombarded with people's thoughts. Paul seemed to fit better into the character type you know him to be. He became more controlled, not less. Still dumb, still irritating, but better. Now before you lies a final path. And as you enter it, you can tell that this one is different. The Reverend Mother sits in the middle of the dark room, and the Atreides stand in the doorway. Jessica is obviously in fear, and the Reverend Mother immediately dismisses her. Paul is upset by this, but before he's even able to finish voicing his objection, he's commanded to walk over to her with the voice. Paul is still defiant to it, but he's completely unable to resist it, let alone use his own version of it back on her. All he can do is ask,
"How dare you use the voice on me?"
showing her that he's aware of what she's doing. She doesn't trick him, she doesn't threaten him. She just reminds him that his
mother bade you obey me.
And Paul, trusting his mother, complies. After he does so, she introduces the concept of the box and the consequences of failure, and that the guards will not come, and that all that he can do is participate. As the process begins, you realize that Paul's pain is not represented through thoughts or visualizations of thoughts. The pain is represented through his face, through his mother's reaction, and most importantly, through sound. That tense, keening noise. Paul cries out in pain, but the Reverend Mother tells him to keep silent. He struggles with this, but you see and hear Jessica whispering the mantra to herself, and you see Paul mouthing it himself. You see that initially he's able to deal with this pain through the strength that his mother taught him. Now, as Paul begins to control himself more and more, you begin to see flashes of imagery. Paul's theme begins to play. As he looks up at Mohiam, you see flames flashing across your vision. Your initial thought is that's what he's imagining inside the box, but as you begin to see the Reverend Mother's veiled face, you realize that she is the one viewing these increasingly elaborate images. Burning structures, burning trees, a field of warriors. And finally, by the time you see a burnt hand engulfed in flames, you don't think that it belongs to him. You think it's caused by him. Now, the look in his eyes isn't fear or pain or an attempt at control, it's anger and resolve. And all the while, Jessica still chants the mantra. Mohiam is seeing Paul's terrible purpose, and she stops, not when she thinks he can't take anymore. She's the one who recoils. This explains why she did it longer with him than anyone else in history. She wanted to see more. She just reached a point where she couldn't bear anymore. So, do you see the difference here? You see, like, in directors alone, there's a difference. The choice to use everything you have at your disposal to make this absolute work of art. The shots are beautiful, the direction of the actors, it's stunning. The foreshadowing involved in this scene alone that wasn't even present in the book is crazy. The sound design is out of this world. I haven't talked about that much, and I'm not really going to because I can't put a lot of the sound in this without getting copy struck. But that one theme, Paul's theme, where it's just that lady yelling, like, it's used to set atmosphere, but it's also used as like a, I don't want to say a plot device really, I don't know the right term for it, for the sake of the story. It's played every time we see a little piece of Paul die, especially when Paul kills Jameis, when he kills his first person. And every time it plays, it's flooring. I could go on and on about each individual scene in this movie, or in these movies, and how well crafted each and every one of them are, how they all feel so intricate and intentional. I don't usually subscribe to the idea of every frame a painting. I don't think every frame has to be art in its own right. I think that idea is a little contrived. Because, you know, like, well, to an extent, what I'm doing here is consumable video media. And you could call it, I guess, art in a broad sense. I surely don't think every frame here is an artwork. You know, most of the frames, it's just this. You know, I do a little work on my mustache, but this is not a craft. But Dune gets very close to that. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's times where you could pause and be like, oh, it doesn't look like much of an artwork to me. It looks like it's a black screen. And you'd probably be right. But the visuals alone are so breathtaking, and again, it feels so intentional from start to finish. So before I end this video, I think I need to address the elephant in the room, or really the two elephants in the room. First of all, my hair in the last clip, I'm sorry. It looked fine in the mirror, and then as soon as I started recording, bam, I'm Millard Fillmore. I have never scheduled a haircut quicker than when I saw this footage. The second, much larger elephant in the room is the new piece of Dune content that's come out lately. That's Dune Prophecy. It's not really in the criteria of this video of like what I would talk about, but it started to come out while I was editing, and I figured I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention it. So if you don't want to hear about it, or if you haven't watched it yet, here's a timestamp for you to skip to. Prophecy is based on the books written by Frank Herbert's son. I haven't read those. I don't really have a plan to read those. I think most works should be allowed to end with their author. Obviously not always. There are some properties that have like a broad range of writers, and that's like a virtue of theirs. But I don't usually like to see someone tack their own canon onto something that somebody else with their own particular artistic vision already created. And that's why, while I don't have much interest in reading the books that were written about this, I'm pretty interested in seeing where this series goes, because it's already an adaptation. So it's, you know, it's fine to take some risks with something because it's not yours, but it's something that you have in your own right to work with. Only 2 episodes are out at the time of recording this, so I can't really break it down in full. I can only say that while I like it, it's very obvious that Villeneuve is not involved with this. Not that it isn't good. I'm genuinely invested in it. It's just lacking a lot of nuance that he has in directing. Villeneuve told the Times of London that, "I don't remember movies because of a good line. I remember movies because of a strong image. I'm not interested in dialogue at all. Pure image and sound, that's the power of cinema." And while I do love some good dialogue, it's obvious that that is his particular style, and it works very well for something so grindy and jargony as Dune. Prophecy does not share that sentiment. The set design is pretty cool, but it's not even close to the Dune movies, and I don't really expect that. Although I think shows like Andor and The Penguin have proven that is very possible to do. There have already been a bunch of very exposition-heavy scenes that really take you out of the immersion of the show.
Sounds like someone's grown too accustomed to the comforts of the palace, not trading off that famous name.
I pledge my sword and my name to the rebellion because the great houses are hoarding spice, forcing the people to turn to violence to get what they need to survive. If the only way to stop this is to spill blood, then don't doubt for a second my allegiance to the cause.
He's saying this to characters who all know his motivations and him as a person and share his motivations. He's just saying that for us. I appreciate it, but it's nice of him, I guess. And that's not uncommon for this show whatsoever. I think it does do a little better compared to the 2000 miniseries in this way, though, because it does at least work from the movies and expect you to know a couple things from the movies. The 2000s miniseries didn't have that. They couldn't. Also, it suffers from the common TV malady that it needs filler to keep people coming back for every episode. And by filler, let me be clear, I mean fan service. I've seen 2 episodes. both have had a scene of it. I think that you can show stuff like this without it being fan service. I think that there are times when it can actually be valuable to the art that you're making. Even the miniseries kind of did that. But this seems like it's just trying to appeal to its gooner viewership. And I'd say I respect the hustle, but I don't really. Because the truth is, you don't have to do fan service for gooners to like it. There is a certain percentage of people who only watched Oppenheimer for 2 reasons and 15 minutes of them, but it was still valuable to the movie. If you want to do stuff like this, and you want to be part of this new trend of movie tie-in prestige television like we've been getting lately, then make it quality content. If you want to show boobs, fine. But at least have them contribute something to the content and don't have them just be the TV equivalent of having Subway Surfers playing in the background. I realize I'm complaining about something that takes up like 8 minutes in an already 2-hour show, but I'm also comparing them to something that I hold on a pretty high pedestal. I mean, it's Dune, and I've spent months thinking about it. I've spent months talking to my camera alone in my room about this. I care now. I care. That said, I am enjoying it. I may review it in full once it's all done, depending on how fatigued I am from making this video and how well it does. We'll see. For the most part, I really like the casting. Mark Strong fits right in with the vibe of Dune. Emily Watson was born to play a Bene Gesserit. Travis Fimmel, I don't know what this guy's deal is, but he creeps me out. And he does a really good job of it, so I think he's pretty good. He gives me like evil Duncan vibes. I don't know. This guy has got a face for TV. I look at this guy, I say he's in a limited series on one of 12 streaming platforms. Anyway, I don't want to talk about it anymore because again, I haven't seen much of it and I don't want to cast any judgment on it yet, but I figured I'd mention it, so yeah. Now back to me with the stupid hair. I seriously considered refilming, by the way. 8 hours of footage. I really thought about it. That's how much I hate how this guy looks. Anyway, back to this idiot. Dune has just been a big thing for me lately, honestly. I remember back when I was a little kid, below 10, only the 6 Star Wars films were out and the surrounding things. And to me, everything about them was exciting. And it was the movies that started it, but what really got me excited was this expansive universe that had so much mystery and intrigue to it. And I was slowly dipping my toes into it. The Clone Wars had been coming out for a while. There were games like Knights of the Old Republic and The Force Unleashed, which I wasn't allowed to play, but I would sneak downstairs into my basement and watch my brother play. There were books, there were comics, and it was all like on the edge of my view. I knew things about them, but I really only knew about the movies and some of the Clone Wars. In that way, that world sort of like captured my imagination as a kid. Those stories could really become my own. And with Dune, even though I've read most of the books now, by the way, one of few movies that have actually gotten me to read, and now that I've even watched most of the adaptations of it, even though I'm not imagining new stories in it like I did back when I was a kid, it's still able to capture that feeling for me. Somehow, some way. It's this almost fictional hope I feel watching it and talking about it and creating stuff like this about it. Even though the story itself isn't a message of hope, actually it's kind of bleak when you think about it. And it's about the art of it somehow, I'm sure, but I legitimately don't know why. I wish I did. I sort of made this video to figure that out, I guess. But it's a good feeling. Thanks for watching, folks. I know this ran long. I'm sure it'll be the longest video I've ever made. Sorry editing me. I also have in my script, sorry filming me, but all I have to do is talk, so I'm not really the one paying here. If you made it to the end, I really appreciate you. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like button, drop a comment. It really helps the video's performance. Like I said, I've never made one this long, so I'm not sure how much YouTube will like this. But if you want to see more of what I make, hit the subscribe button too. I've got a lot like this. Shorter, but like this. There's more Dune coming out. There's a game coming out. There's a series about the Bene Gesserit. There's going to be more movies. So if this does well, I might do more. Maybe not as long. And if you want more of me, I released a song on Spotify. It's called Rambler, No Ramblin'. I'll link that below. And I should have another one coming out soon. So actually, I'll just link my Spotify. And besides that, I think I'm done talking.